Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Special Planning Committee on April 24th for the Township of Muskoka Lakes. I wish to confirm that we have full council here, with the exception of Council McIntyre. We also have CAO Hammond and Director Pink and Chief, but Municipal Bylaw Officer Rob Kennedy. We advised that there was public input on the agenda, and it was invited at the standard address planning@muskokalakes.ca. Today's meeting is being live streamed and recorded on the Township of Muskoka Lakes website and YouTube channel. And by participating in the open meeting today, you are consenting to your image, voice, and comments being recorded and posted online. I do believe we have no supplementary agenda. And I ask the council if there are any pecuniary interests. Very good. So I will highlight today that we only have two resolutions. One is to start the meeting and one is to finish the meeting. Moved by Councillor Roberts. This is not the one to finish the meeting, by the way. Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Nishikawa. Be it resolved that the rules of procedures relating to motions and debates be suspended for the duration of the short-term rentals discussion, and that they be reinstated at the conclusion of the said discussion. Any discussion? All those in favor? Anybody opposed? Carried. You got a pen? Very well. So today's topic is the first step on our journey to Councillor Mazin.
I was just wondering if the clerk might be able to connect with Councillor McIntyre. She is trying to get into today's meeting, but for some reason, the Zoom, I don't know if she has the correct Zoom code or whatever, but if somebody from the office could help, that would be great. Thank you.
I've sent her the link, but I'll resend.
Thank you very much. Today we are discussing the short-term rentals. This is a journey that started for the township in 2016 when staff was first reported to ask to look at it. There have been a number of meetings since, the most recent one being last month, where council directed staff to start on a process to consider implementing short-term rental licensing. So this today is the first step. Staff is going to be presenting to us the various attributes of the short-term rentals, and our objective today is to ensure that this committee agrees with that direction, and an overall, not that we don't want to get into the details, but the general direction and the attributes of that short-term rentals are whether staff has it right and whether we have it, whether we agree with it. And this is to ensure that, we don't get way off track farther down into the process. So let's get the path set properly. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Kennedy and let him, Mr. Kennedy, and if you could proceed. And I think you'll see that throughout the process where this will be an, he's not going to go through the whole presentation. He'll get through the beginning, and then we will do piece by piece as we go through each element of the possibilities for this bylaw.
Good morning, committee. Everybody online can hear me? Okay. Yes. Perfect. My name, just a little bit of an introduction for the people that are watching that may not know me. I'm Rob Kennedy, the Chief Municipal Law Enforcement Officer for the Township of Muskoka Lakes. Rachel is hoping to join us. She is our other officer, but she had to go out on an urgent call this morning. But hopefully she can join us later on, as she does have some parts, but if she doesn't make it back, I will be covering for those sections. For the agenda today, oh, sorry. Do we have the presentation up? Sorry. There we go. So for today, as Chair Bosomworth has indicated, we are talking about the short-term rental accommodation bylaw and the possible regulations with the direction from July 2022 last year, where council decided to move forward with a draft licensing bylaw. This is the first step in that process. So we're going to start with a bit of background on how we've gotten to where we are today. Some benchmarking where we will look at what different municipalities do specifically within the district, and we can touch on some other places that are outside of the district within Ontario. Then we'll talk about a bit of regulatory options and the framework of licensing bylaws specific to short-term rentals. And then at that point, we are going to move into variable options. And this will be the point where we will go one by one for some optional items that could or could not be included into a licensing bylaw. And we are looking to get council input in regards to those variable options. After that, we will summarize, go through our financial implications, and then our next steps. So to start again with a little bit of the background, as Councillor Bosomworth has already indicated, this started back in 2016-17, where staff started to investigate at council's direction. Through that session, a steering committee was created, and ultimately it was a code of conduct was created, which is still relevant today. That is disseminated by staff out to members of the public when we do deal with complaints. It also recommended that regulatory bylaws be updated, which has been ongoing in the last couple of years, and more resources for bylaw were indicated at that time, which in a sense created my position as well as seasonal staff. Back in 2018, a study was done. This map is from Granicus, one of the monitoring softwares that's available to municipalities for short-term rental regulation. So these numbers are from 2018 in March, which shows, I know it's a little bit small at the bottom, but at that point we had 451 unique rentals within the township, within the boundaries of the township of Muskoka Lakes. Now, if we fast forward that to 2023 in March, we now have almost doubled to 801 unique rental units. The 980 number that you see on this is for places that have multiple ads, where they'll have an ad on Airbnb, VRBO, Expedia, et cetera, et cetera. These are 2023 numbers. As I'll note, the $559 is in US dollars. So if you can do the quick math on that one, Canadian, you're looking around, I would think, $650, $675 a night. There you go, $746 a night. So that is really high for short-term rentals based on other research that we've done. You will also see entire homes, and it's only single-family dwellings that are mainly being rented out in this municipality. So moving into what we are doing today, as I've noted, last couple of years, we have updated several regulatory bylaws, and the code of conduct is still disseminated today. But the problem still persists. We continue to receive emails and receive complaints in regards to activities that arise from short-term rentals. And again, in July 2022, the resolution was to bring back a draft licensing bylaw to council. And again, this is where we start with that process. So moving into the benchmarking, this will be just what's happened in other district municipalities. I will start to say that everybody aside from ourselves.
Sorry, point of order. Would you like questions at the time they come up, or do you want to wait until the presentation's over?
I would like to get through the first section where we and then we will start speaking about the various elements. So we'll pause there for questions on up to that point.
So in relation to our increase over the last 5 years, I'm sure everybody is well aware that short-term rentals has vastly increased I would say over the last 10 years across the world, not just here. And that's due in part to having the online platforms such as Airbnb and VRBO readily available for anybody in the world to rent out any piece of property that they wish to do so. Back then in 1960s, 1970s, usually you would see short-term rentals in the form of, the owner puts up an ad on a corkboard at work with the little numbers, and you pick off the tab and call them and make a reservation that way. So that was very limited on who was going to be renting. And we've just seen over the last 10, 15 years with these online platforms that it's really, really progressed. Over that time as well, a lot of municipalities have battled with the rise of this, the extreme rise. And most commonly, we have seen, at least in Ontario and in the United States, that a lot of municipalities are turning to a form of licensing in order to try and get a little bit of a better handle on what they're dealing with. So the comparators, as I said, we're going to talk about the district municipalities that we have and what they do and when they've implemented things. And we also did extra research on municipalities in Ontario that were similar to our population and demographics, being seasonal versus permanent, et cetera, et cetera. Again, we and Georgian Bay are the only two municipalities in the district right now that don't have any regulations for short-term rentals. So we'll start with Bracebridge. They passed theirs May 19th, just last year. It is a form of licensing. It is not as fulsome as, say, Huntsville's licensing bylaw. They have a little bit less. There's no administrative monetary penalty system. There is no zoning amendment that was created, so they are permitted in all zones. But the main key on this one here is that they don't require the safety inspections from building, fire, and bylaw. Gravenhurst is the newest of the district municipalities to pass a bylaw, which only started at the start of 2023. They are probably arguably the most relaxed, but they are still a form of licensing. It's more, if I can say, a little bit of a registry. You would apply to have your short-term rental in that township. There are no safety inspections. It's simply register with the township to ensure that they are aware that you're a short-term rental, and then go forth through the licensing process. Huntsville, they are the, I guess, most advanced in the district. They started theirs March 1st in 2020. So they have gone through at least 3 years of their licensing program. Theirs is the most fulsome that we have in the district at this point. They do all of the inspections. They have set dates for appeals and a set process for appeals and so on and so forth. They utilize what's called a 3-strike penalty system. So if there are any contraventions at the property, they have essentially 3 chances. And then once that 3rd chance comes forward, they have their license suspended. The last one is Lake of Bays, which is a little bit different than most of the other district municipalities. They implemented theirs at the start of last year in 2022. They went a little bit farther. They did amend their zoning bylaw and prohibited some STRs in some zones and permitted, but they go as far as making a classification system. So they run classifications A, B, and C, and it's all dependent on different types of regulations, whether it be night per stay, how many people are going to be there. So there's different levels of licensing fees and so on and so forth. They are township inspected like Huntsville, and they do have appeal committees, and they have established administrative monetary penalty systems. A little bit different with Lake of Bays. They run a demerit point penalty system for licenses. So in that sense, I'll get into it a little bit later, but quickly, that sense, demerit points is set depending on the severity of the contravention. And then once you get to a certain amount of demerit points, that is when your license would be suspended. As I said, we did do extensive research on many other municipalities in Ontario, specifically some that didn't actually have licensing bylaws, but different approaches. We did find a couple that outright prohibit short-term rentals in their zoning bylaw. But at the same time, I will say that a lot of those municipalities had text on their website that said that they were having challenges with that approach. and they were also reviewing going down the licensing route. Other municipalities have simply been status quo where they haven't passed any type of regulation, and they've more or less done a zero tolerance policy on all regulatory bylaws. So no ifs, ands, or buts. If there was a complaint for a short-term rental, it would automatically result in a penalty. Others have done zoning bylaw amendments to simply just either blanket the township and permit them everywhere, or they have done, as we've seen in Lake of Bays, where they have prohibited and permitted in certain zones. Moving to the regulatory options, looking at the short-term rental characteristics within this municipality, we're more or less on the top three. We're predominantly, obviously, waterfront residential. I would say that if you go back to the map in 2023, you will see that a lot of the little blue and red dots are all bordering all of our lakes. There are very little that are outside. So again, we're prominently waterfront residential where the rentals are happening, and predominantly they're secondary residences. A lot of people have cottage properties up here that they rent out rather than stay here most of the year. So there is a bit of a difference when it comes to primary residences versus secondary residences in that sense. And for the township, we are predominantly, I would believe, secondary residences as far as the short-term rentals go. Some are on islands, water access only, which is a little bit unique for us as well. And the biggest thing for us is that we have a very drastic difference in rentals in the township. We have some rentals that are your 7,500 square foot home that's on the waterfront that has every amenity imaginable. And, there's some that I've seen that cost well over $5,000 a night, versus there are some in the township that are simply just 1 or 2 bedroom little cabins that are on the property. They don't have very many amenities, and they're renting out for as little as $100 a night. So that is a big difference in this township that you don't necessarily see in others. I'm not going to go through this whole list of concerns, but mainly the top 3 that we have continued to see from 2016 and on is one is the safety aspect. We want to ensure that if people are coming to this township, that they're renting out the properties, and that the properties that they are renting out are going to be safe. As we've seen from 2018 to 2023, with the 350 increase in numbers for short-term rentals, we are starting to see a loss of community character. You can go onto some streets in this township, and you'll have, say, 30 houses on it, and you could very well have 6 or 7 of those be short-term rentals. And again, the residents' loss of enjoyment of their property. As I've said already, we continue to receive emails and complaints. While there may not be files created for them because there is no issue the way our bylaws are written at this time, we do continue to get complaints regarding noise, parking, fireworks, littering, trespassing is a huge one. But on this page, is there anything that committee sees on this or doesn't see on this that we would like to include? I will kind of stop there and allow for that.
You read my mind, Mr. Kennedy. I think this is a good place to stop, and we could turn it over to council or committee rather for questions and also. Yeah, how can I tell that?
Maybe take the screen share down.
See, there's a little black.
Mhm.
I think.
Very well. So let's have the questions on material presented so far, and then address Mr. Kennedy's request on whether there are any additional characteristics or concerns. So let me open it up, and I see Councillor Roberts has the first hand up.
In just 1 minute, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. And I'll start with this slide because I had other questions and other slides. But I think that this is a good grocery list of concerns throughout Muskoka Lakes, not just pertaining to short-term rentals. And I suggest that there are only 2 things that the short-term rental policy should address. And those this is just my initial thought or my thoughts so far. Number 1 is overcapacity and use of septic tanks. And substantial, the second one would be substantial commercial businesses, ghost hotels operating in residential areas that are not complying to the official plan commercial accommodation policies. Many items listed.
Councillor
on-
Roberts,
Yes,
this is a question period to make sure we understand what the presentation has been at this moment. If we could get through those first.
okay, okay.
So
let's-
where we've got opinions that we want to
all right.
express, let's hold them a little farther into the presentation, but please do not forget what you want to ask.
I will. Thank you very much, Chair. Sorry about that. So the one I wanted to add it is substantial commercial businesses, ghost hotels operating in residential areas that are not complying to the official plan commercial accommodation policies. That's
Mr. Kennedy?
So yeah, we can add anything or delete anything from this list. I'm happy to hear any other suggestions.
Perhaps we could just hold that on the side. I don't know, could you keep a list of those items that we'll hold on the side? And at the end, I think as a group, we will decide whether we want to add these on or not. So are there any more questions or just for clarification? Councillor Kent?
And when you asked for questions, I thought it was in any of the material up to now.
Yes, it is.
Okay. I was wondering, having spoken to Jane of Jane's Cottages, who's a friend, what data we have on our complaints. I haven't seen that. We talk about the complaints up front and we talk about the number of properties, but I was wondering how many complaints we've had and how many individual properties the complaints were coming from. Because one of the pieces of data that Jane gave to me, which was very insightful and interesting, was that in Seguin, one of the, I think one of the best managed prop areas around, she said to me that they'd had 250 complaints in the most recent season or the season before that. And that list of 250 complaints came from 7 individual units. So that meant that there were only 7 problem units that registered on their complaint system. So the question is, if they had, I don't know, if we have 800, maybe they had 600
first.
and 600 properties. I don't know their numbers, 250 complaints, and it was 7 individual units. So that's, to me, gives me one, area. If it's 7 problem areas, I don't know if ours is 250 complaints over 250 properties, or if we have 500 complaints over 7 properties. So I'd like to know the detail on our complaint data, because I think it does drive this discussion and what we're trying to fix so significantly.
Mr. Kennedy?
To answer that question, going back to the 2023 year-end stats, files created for short-term rental complaints was only 13. That being said, as I've already talked about before, that does not include any emails or phone calls that we received where people would complain, i.e. daytime noise, where it's not an actual contravention, but based on the way that it was described to us, without specifically knowing it's a short-term rental, the way it was described to us was in a manner that these people calling had no idea who the people were next door. So that would assume to me that that would be some sort of rental, or at least not the owner that they are aware of. I don't have that exact number because we don't track phone calls as we do, like say the OPP, where they can, track every single phone call that comes in. If we don't have a contravention and there's no action for the township to take, we don't create a file for that. But I will say we had 13 files created last year. And of those 13 files, there were a few that were repeat. And at the same time, those 13 files, specifically, I can remember one file is for about 4 different complaints for 4 separate weekends, but the same property. So we didn't make a file for each weekend. We made one file and it just progressed, which we are frankly still dealing with today.
So can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Just so make sure I get that. For whatever reason, Seguin has 250 complaints. Maybe they have a better tracking system, I don't know, or a different tracking system. We had 13 complaints, and of the 13 registered complaints, I'm just saying registered because I understand you mentioned all the others. how many individual units was the 13 complaints never repetitive? Or is it 13 individual different properties? And on each of those, there could have been 4 complaints.
Mr. Kennedy? I think you answered that, but
Yeah,
Right.
there are some files that we've opened in the 13 that are the same property that happened, say, maybe 3 months apart. So there are a few there that are the same property, but I would say out of the 13, 9 or 10 of them are specific properties.
Okay, so
If
have
you
we ever investigated those specific properties and followed up with them so we know who the offenders are?
I don't understand, like, when we make a file, that's when we're following up with the owner and dealing with the complaint.
Right. And the only reason I ask this is just, and this is question period, I understand, it's just when you look at the Seguin data, they had 7 significant problem properties and 250 complaints related to the 7 properties. And it sounds like we have maybe 10 properties that are causing the majority of our problem. And I'm jumping to conclusion there because our database is quite small comparatively. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. That was the data I was trying to understand. Is it an isolated problem with lots of talk, or is it a big problem across a wide swath of properties?
Mr. Kennedy?
I just want to point out that many bylaws that are created, the percentage of people that actually contravene the bylaws is quite minimal. The bylaws are put in place so that people understand the rules and follow the rules, and there's consequences for people that don't follow those said rules. So regardless of what bylaw we're talking about, we can talk about the burning bylaw, we can talk about the noise bylaw. We have, thousands of different properties in this township, and the amount of complaints that we had, say, for burning would probably account for less than 1% of properties in the township. So in a sense, when you look at 801 short-term rentals and we had 13 files opened on 801 rentals, that still roughly is the same as what, say, a burning or a noise bylaw contravention percentage would be.
Yeah, that's not exactly the point I was making, but my point was just we're going after what we may be going after, and I don't have any reason to think this is the case. A small problem group of people with a sledgehammer. Sledgehammer is not even the right analogy. Going after a group of people that are a real problem with this massive program, and I'm not opposed to short-term rental registration. I don't want anybody to think that. I'm just asking questions. This is what this day is about. But are we going after a very small group of problem properties with a massive program? And that's with a massive program and a lot of administration and bureaucracy, where we can isolate the problem properties and go after it that way, at least in the interim, and see if that makes an impact. So I'll leave it at
Director
that.
Pink would
Thank
like
you.
to make Director Pink would like to make a comment.
Thank you. And through you, just to help frame some of the discussion, I think Mr. Kennedy's answered the question well. It's difficult, I guess, to really focus on the true numbers because when a complaint comes in where staff might not necessarily know if it is a short-term rental because we're not licensing them or monitoring them. And as Mr. Kennedy pointed out, I think a number of departments have received complaints or concerns, but there's no violation because again, the regulatory bylaws don't cover it. I think what's important though, and what the point of this slide is, it's labeled concerns and we can all talk about it, but really what it is framing the problem or the issue. These are the issues we're hearing. And I think Councillor Roberts raised a few, and I think they're on the list, the septic and the sort of perceived commercial use of residential properties and loss of community character. But I think it's perhaps not that prudent to go down the pure numbers route, because to put it in perspective, what we're trying to do through the licensing bylaws to ensure that these properties are operated properly and that neighboring property owners aren't negatively impacted. So to put it into perspective, we have a taxi licensing bylaw, and I believe we have one taxi operator in the township. We have a refreshment vehicle licensing bylaw, and I believe we license about 5 refreshment vehicles in a year. It's not that they're problems. It's we're ensuring that they're operated according to our standards and what we want to ensure that neighboring property owners and the users and the patrons of those facilities are protected. So you have almost or over 800 unique short-term rental properties in our township. I think per capita, that could be the highest in the province. And I think what staff is suggesting, or previous terms of council have asked us to bring this forward and draft a licensing bylaw now on 2 occasions. The point of that is to ensure that those concerns that we've listed here are addressed. And I think that's the point of this slide and the question that Mr. Kennedy is asking. Do we have the concerns right? Have we framed the problem so that we can ensure we craft a licensing bylaw to address those concerns? So I think rather than get into how many complaints and how many issues are there out there, what are we trying to solve? I think is a more fruitful direction or discussion. That helps.
Councillor Zavitz, if you can.
Thank you, and through you, and I guess a question to you. Thanks, David. That was an excellent preamble to what I would want to say, and I guess to this committee. This concerns page is it. It's really what I think we need to do is the marketing 101 exercise is, first of all, understand the problem, and then in aggregate, there is the problem. These are the problems that we're concerned about, but I could certainly prioritize. And I guess that's where I would come to you as the chair. Shouldn't we be actually looking at prioritizing these particular items? Because to add more, I mean, they're there right now. The 2 big ones, to my mind, and what I'm hearing out here for these years are on here. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't, from 1 to, we didn't do that 1 to 12. I don't even know if we need to, but I sure would like to know what the top 3 are. And then we would create a solution based on that. One of the things we don't even know yet is the mechanism that we have in place right now, which isn't the most useful, no criticism, but I don't think it works, to be honest. So we need a mechanism for the people out there to put the flag up that there is a problem here or there somewhere. So I'm asking you as the chair, should we prioritize these, top 3, for example, because the rest of them are, dogs without leashes. It's just not why I'm here today. Thank you.
Mayor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you. This is a big issue for me, so I want to address a couple of the issues that were raised by Councillor Kent and reflect a little bit on some of the comments of Councillor Zavitz. Three issues and their questions. I think I absolutely do not believe we can tie anything to the volume of complaints that are made, nor can we tie anything to the volume of the complaints that are made by location. And I'll give you reasons why. Number one, at my own particular place, and I hate personalizing it, we get random noise from across the water. I have no idea. I can tell you, I think the noise is often coming from one of 2 islands in front of mine, which is Black Forest and Burgess Island. So maybe it's coming from somebody's property who's on the call. But I say that, I mean, the reality is if I were to call in and make a complaint, I generally do not know, nor do I care where it's coming from. I just want it stopped. Second thing is the one occasion when I'm aware of a complaint coming from our bay, the neighbors got together at 2 o'clock in the morning and said, this has to stop. One of us should file a complaint. The other 6 of us went back to bed. So again, volume of complaints is pretty irrelevant. And the third thing, and to key on to something that Councillor Zavitz suggested, the current system doesn't solve the problem. And if you've laid a complaint and have been unsatisfied in how it got responded or didn't get responded, you're not going to lay the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th complaint. So to count those numbers, to me, adds up to the only last comment. If we had 13 complaints last year, I can almost guarantee, and I could probably go back through my emails and texts, that I got 130 complaints on these issues. It is still, as through this winter, we know there was someone who reminded us all on council that we ran to solve this problem, and what have we done to solve it? There's a high expectation that whatever we do will be done for May. It won't be. But people, this is a big, huge concern among people who come here for traditional uses, and their needs need to be respected as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think that the scope or the size of the need can be reflected in the volume of calls that come into the complaint center. Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy, and then Councillor Mazin.
Yeah, and just to back on to Mayor Kelly's comments, I will say that last year, now I would safely say between the summer months, June, July, August area, we were getting complaints almost daily for, you know, daytime noise or burning or something. And like I said, you know, without knowing if it was a short-term rental, the way it was described to us certainly sounded like it could have been. But, you know, we get those complaints through the daytime that we can't necessarily deal with. So, you know, to back on to Mayor Kelly's point, you know, to his 130 emails, that safe to say that that comes through our office too.
Councillor Mazin.
Thank you, and through you. Just wanted to add another concern, and it's actually, I don't know how to frame it up, so I'm just going to say with the concern out, which is as taxpayers, we are paying through our taxes to add to enforcement. We've just heard how much time sometimes these things can take for commercial businesses to operate, and there's no burden on them. So I don't know how to say that differently or more eloquently, but I do think that there is a concern that we are offsetting from a tax standpoint, other people benefiting. And that's something that I think we need to add in somehow to the concern list. Thanks.
Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I've been going through this problem for 12 years now, and we haven't solved it. We're not even close. But what I would have liked to have seen in the actual in that report is what fees are charged by other municipalities, what the revenue is for the taxes that they're bringing up to show that it is viable. Why should a short-term rental not have to follow any rules, and yet we make our resorts do all the other things with septic and everything else? How many septic complaints do we get? The neighbor doesn't know if it's a septic problem or not, but you got 20 people flushing the toilet. It probably is. That's why you have to license. But I'd like to hear why we haven't been given the figures that the other ones are getting. Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy, could you tell us what some of the fees are in the other townships? I think that was the main question.
Yeah. Off the top of my head, as I discussed in the Lake of Bays, they do different fees depending on how many days per year you rent, how many people stay in the actual rental. So their fees do vary. I know that Blue Mountain, for example, they are pretty much at ground zero for short-term rental regulations. They are upwards to $2,500 for a 2-year license. Some other municipalities are $1,000 per year. There's some that are as little as $300 per year. So it just depends. That's going to be one of the variable options that we discuss later on. But it's going to all depend on how committee wants to structure their fees and where we go with that. That will be something that committee will decide on in a little bit. But that's roughly where it's very vast. Like I said, there are municipalities that are going up. From discussions that I've had with other bylaw officers and other municipalities, a lot of municipalities are looking at it and most likely going to be increasing their licensing fees. If I don't know if it's been confirmed yet, but Romera is certainly looking at, I believe they were about $1,000 to $1,500. They're looking at increasing it to about $2,500 for per year.
Councillor Roberts, then I have a couple of questions.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I'm looking at the page that says the rise of short-term rental accommodations and point 3, where it states, I'll just read it for everyone. Municipalities across Ontario have established regulatory tools. So my question is, other than licensing, what are the other regulatory tools that have been established to solve the problems or concerns of short-term rentals?
Mr. Kennedy?
To answer that is going to be dealt with on the next 2 slides after we're finished this question period. So I'll get into that in a few minutes.
Okay.
Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. I was getting a little bit confused about what I could ask or during this first section. But I did want to say, and I think we talked about this before, that during Roma, we, at least three of us spent a great amount of time on this conversation. The thing was really stuck out to me, and I noted it 3 times, which meant 3 different parts of the hour or 2 long presentation, was that this program should pay for itself. One of the biggest expenses apparently could be the software and the monitoring of that software. So I have a lot of questions about all of that, and I'm expecting that we have to get through the whole presentation honestly before, but I did want to, my experience, and I honestly, I've been aware and involved with short-term rentals my whole since 2000, and even beyond that. It was the ability for some people to pay their taxes, quite frankly. So it would be that 2 weeks at a time, and even
Councillor Ishikawa, if we're starting
I'm
to
going to get
discuss
there.
that.
No,
okay,
I'm
there
going
is-
to get there.
just clarifying here,
Yeah.
are there more concerns that we've missed? And were there any questions from the presentation? Because we're clearly going to get lots of discussion.
I don't believe that we have collected the correct information from when I have asked other questions from other staff members. I don't believe we collected the correct information concerning the septic use and this is where it came really big in the town of Bala, for instance, where a short-term rental, while many thought it was on town's services, was not. So that was going to be their pass if they could show that they were on town sewer services, but in fact they weren't. And then it grew from there, and then it became more of a vulgar use. And I will say, Glenn, we're talking about Curry Street, and that more about was habit. So going forward, I think there is more information that we need to break down those properties with the septic and in fact deal with it that way.
Thank you. I have a couple of quick short questions. Gravenhurst, I think you essentially described that as a short-term rental license light. In that, had a fairly soft touch, is a quasi-register. Does that still give them the ability to shut them down if they're non-compliant?
Yeah, it does. I don't believe they have any specific like 3-strike rule or demerit point system. I think the way their bylaws written is if there is a contravention and they feel it's serious enough, then they can pull your license.
Thank you. Second question. How did Lake of Bay determine their zonings? Was there any criteria?
I'm unable to answer that. That would be something for Lake of Bays to answer.
Thank you. Mayor Kelly, one final point, and I think we should let Mr. Kennedy.
There's just a real quick question. If you go the rezoning route that Lake of Bays does, do you face a grandfathering issue on existing units? I just don't know.
Well,
Director Pink.
Sure, I can handle the planning question probably a little easier. Yes, I suspect I haven't personally looked in. We can certainly reach out to Lake of Bays and ask what zones they prohibited and what zones they permitted, but it will be consistent across Ontario. The Planning Act would not permit a zoning bylaw to be passed and be retroactive. So if an existing operation is in operation or a property is used as a short-term rental and we would pass or update our zoning bylaw to prohibit it, there would be nothing preventing that continued use.
Thank you very much. Quick one.
Derek, you're looking comfy. Sorry. One of the last things that I noted from my notes from Roma, and it came across pretty strong to me, was that this should not be under planning. These conversations are about bylaw and legal issues, and it actually isn't a planning matter. So we're talking about the zoning and things like that, but they noted, and I did point, as I said, it was, don't bring anything to council before committee figures it out, but it's something that should not be under planning. And I'm wondering if we're actually sort of taking up planning time when in fact we should be trying to keep it within your department. I'll just say that. Thank you.
CEO Hammond.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the committee. Right now, this is being led by bylaw. It happens to be under the development services umbrella, which planning is part of, but I would suggest to you that this isn't necessarily being led by the planning component of that division. I think it's in the bylaw area. And in addition, I think the clerk's area will have input as we go through the process, should committee decide you want to go down a licensing regime road. So I'm happy with where we're at and where we're going. Thank you.
Council or committee rather, we're going to move along. And I will just reiterate, staff are following our directions that we were given in March. Mr. Kennedy has done quite a bit of work putting this together, and I would like to move along as quickly as we can and just stay on topic, remembering that we're not trying to debate whether or not we want short-term rentals. We've already given guidance that we want to go down this process. And so our objective here is to make sure that the content of which we will be going out to the public with is in line with more or less what we believe. We're not going to make any decisions here, but that's what we are trying to do for staff, which we have asked them to do. Councillor Zavis, quick comment.
Thank you, and I do appreciate it. I don't want the last word, but I have to take umbrage with your words, because sitting here for the last period of council and now this new period, that to my mind isn't exactly what the mandate was. The mandate was and is, as I understand it, to bring this information to the table for the 10 of us and the public to consider whether we want to legislate licensing at all, or whether we want to legislate, we call it STR, whatever it is, cottage rentals. That's where my head is, and I hope that's where some of the committee's heads are. If I'm not even going to make a statement about licensing, but I'm not a fan, and I can tell you that I think we need a made in the township of Muskoka Lakes solution to this. I don't really care what Blue Mountain does, because they have skiing and a whole other system of amplifying their resources, their financial resources. So and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've misread this over the months, but I didn't think the mandate for these fine people today was to do any more than bring us this information for us to consider. So when you make a statement like we are going down the licensing road, we might end up there, but right now I don't think we are there. Maybe I'm wrong, and I would love clarification of that and that is a question.
Thank you. I don't think I said that we were going down a licensing road. I said council gave direction to staff to do some work. This is the first step in that work. I think that once we want public input on this, but we need to give the public a framework upon which they need to give us input. And there is nothing to preclude us that has predetermined the outcome of this, whether we have short-term rentals or not. But we need to, this is a big problem from everything I've heard, and that we need to determine a solution that, as you said, works for this council or this township. And one of the best ways to do that is to get our public input, as long as they got a framework to work from. Is that fair enough? Thank you. Mr. Kennedy, back to you. Councillor Kent, if you're very brief, please. You're on mute.
I want to agree with Councillor Zavitz. I thought this was an open session to discuss the general concept of short-term licensing, rather than to jump into, here are the specifics of what we're going to do. We can get there, but I mean, there isn't even a financial forecast. And I, by the way, think this is a planning issue. This is not a bylaw issue. That's the way we do things in this township through bylaws, but this is a discussion of, this is a planning discussion. Is this a business that we want to get into of licensing short-term rentals? And if we are, how are we going to make it pay for itself and accomplish the concerns and objectives we have? I thought this was an open discussion, not a specific discussion. And I'd be disappointed if we don't get to really talk about the reality and viability of this.
Mayor Kelly. You could comment,
Let
please.
me just, thank you, and through you, let me just take a quick stab at this, and I don't have the documentation in front of me, but we have actually, this body has actually been down this road 2 or 3 times already. And to date have yet to find either the correct motivation or the correct form to move forward with a plan, with a proposal. My recollection, and we can pull up, I believe there was a resolution on this. I think it was from maybe October of last year, was it? Or was it early this year, where we decided to pull it back out and work on it? My understanding was that this grew, not this team, not this necessarily this particular group of elected officials, but this council decided that this was an issue we could no longer ignore, and that we needed to step in the breach and address it with a system of licensing, which was viewed as the appropriate way to manage the problem. The problem, we've broken it down in terms of concerns. The problem is not the activity of renting the place. The problem is the behavior that often accompanies a rented location. And I don't think our current approach to bylaw enforcement is ever going to solve the potential for 801 or whatever the number is, individual problems arising simultaneously on any given Saturday night. We need to find a bigger way and a bigger method to approach this, and much more consequential, consequences to resolving problems that come up. And licensing is I think the step we decided to pursue. My recollection again was the direction to staff was come back with us with a proposal. In fact, I really like this approach, which breaks it down into bite-sized chunks we all get to weigh in on. I thought we were actually going to get like a draft agreement. This is a preliminary step to a draft of proposal that gets us engaged individually on small parts and small bites before the draft gets finalized. I think this is a terrific approach, but nothing happens because we've decided to go down the route of licensing. To my way of thinking, this group still has to approve whatever comes of the exercise. So we aren't going to wake up one morning and read in the paper that we've got a new licensing regime unless this body gets back together. My guess is 3 or 4 more times and finalizes it. We're going to go to public consultation. We've all agreed at some point in the last discussion, whatever we do here alters the rights that the current rights that property owners have. And we don't take that lightly. We're going to go to the public and ask for consultation and feedback to make sure we get it right. We're going to learn. And I realize we don't care what happens in Blue Mountain. I do care what happens in Blue Mountain. They made a serious misstep on their first effort, and it cost them credibility and it cost them time. We need to do that. We need to make sure that we learn from what our other municipalities in similar circumstances have already learned. But I think we're on the track to drafting an agreement. How it gets paid for is the second issue. The third issue, how will we know how it's going to get paid for until we know what we're buying? And that's these list of options. Do we want bucket seats? Do we want the AM, FM radio? Or do we just simply want the Gremlin with the 4-cylinder engine in it? We've got to figure that out. Then we'll figure out how to cost it out. And the other thing I will point out, well, we'll get to it when we get to it. There appears to be plenty of money to make this self-fund with a little bit of back of the envelope math and a tax and a fee. This could be this will pay for itself. We'll pay for the cost of enforcement as well. But I don't have the resolution. I'm pretty sure that that's how we put it to staff. But if we can pull something up, it would be helpful.
Mr. Kennedy, and then I'm going to make a suggestion.
So to Mayor Kelly's point, the resolution number is C-2-13/07/22. So that resolution was done in the July 2022 council meeting, where it was specific that council directed staff to bring back a draft licensing bylaw, along with additional items in the budget, which, as we know, council has approved the bylaw administrative position, and to continue to update the regulatory bylaws. So this presentation, we're doing this in baby steps. We're taking a different approach of how we're creating bylaws. We've done an approach before, where, as we've seen with the tree conservation site alteration bylaw, we've done public consultation that way, and it took roughly about a year for those to pass. So we're taking a different approach to this by giving committee items that you are able to give us input on, and then we're going to take that back and we're going to build something into a framework for a licensing bylaw as directed by council in July 2022, and bring that back and go to the public and allow them to comment, have an open house, have a public meeting, and allow the public, there's going to be ample time for the public to get involved in this. So with that open house meeting with staff, having a public meeting where everybody from the public can come in and speak to members of council to voice their concerns or their opinions. So this is the way we're going about it. It is a bit of a different approach. But I feel as Mayor Kelly has said, I think this is a decent approach to come at it with first a little bit of input from committee, go out to the public, bring back a draft bylaw, and continue down that road.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. So let me just ask committee if they are happy to let Mr. Kennedy continue with his presentation. We can learn what he's talking about, and at each regulatory option, we will have a brief discussion about whether we think that's appropriate and whether he's on the right track or not. And so just kind of a show of hands, everybody's okay with that? Councillor Zavitz, one quick point.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, not for a moment was I trying to lead anyone beyond the gathering of information, and that is why I'm here today. And that's my only intent. So it certainly isn't to derail or get us going in a different direction. Right now, we're receiving information, we're looking at it, and open mind.
Thank you. All right, everybody else in agreement, let's move on. Mr. Kennedy, we are now dealing, I think you've got your input. There certainly was a couple of concerns noticed, but one, I guess, in the one about, what was it? There was certainly concerns about imbalance for the resorts. There was a reinforcement of the concerns about septics, and there was another one. So please move on, and the floor is yours. You want regulatory options, that's it.
Perfect. Okay, continuing on. As I said before, these next two slides have kind of already been talked about a little bit, but there's 4 different regulatory options that we feel is necessary or could be necessary for the township. The first one being is we simply continue to down the road we're going now with the status quo and updating bylaws. This is essentially the route that we've gone from the 2016-17 process, and obviously the concerns are still prevalent. So there is an option that we don't do anything and we just continue to update bylaws, and we can create new bylaws, some that we don't have as it shows here: clean yards, public nuisance, etc. The second is the zoning route. I believe Mr. Pink has already described how the zoning would go. If we did a zoning bylaw amendment, those 801 properties that are already renting would end up being a legal non-conforming use. So in a sense, that really does not solve the problem. Third and fourth option is they're both forms of licensing bylaws. As I said, we have a registry type, which is a little bit more relaxed, which is more in line to say with Bracebridge and Gravenhurst. And then we have a more fulsome licensing bylaw as we would see in, say, Lake of Bays or Huntsville. So those are the 4 different options that can be chosen. And going forward with a framework of a licensing bylaw, This is to obviously, it's just as it says, it's to establish licensing, applications, refusals, regulations, penalties, et cetera, regardless of when a short-term rental has existed. It could be 10 years that they've been renting. It could be 6 months that they've been renting. If we pass a licensing bylaw, every single person has to get a license. There is no grandfathering that, oh, I've done this before, I don't need to get a license. Once these types of bylaws pass, everybody has to comply with them. Quickly, for an application and issuance process, realistically, it's just going to be 3 steps. Simply, property owners are going to apply to the township. We're going to review the documents, set up all the safety inspections, if we choose to do those safety inspections, and then either deny or approve the license. There is a list at the bottom of this slide that shows a couple of options of how we can deny licenses without even having to do inspections. The main one would be that if someone has unpaid penalties or fines, we could automatically just deny that new application, or if it's a renewal, we could certainly suspend that until all unpaid fines are completed. Again, I'm not going to go through all these bullet points, but these are what, in staff's opinion, should be a must-have for licensing application requirements. I know it does look like a lot, but those are the ones. There's going to be a couple that we're going to talk about as far as variables go, but these are the ones that staff feel probably should be in a licensing bylaw should we go through that process and go down that road. Quickly, the definition of a short-term rental accommodation. If you've looked at other municipal bylaws, they are relatively identical. There may be some caveats where, say, the period of 28 consecutive days, usually we will see anywhere between 28 and 31. 28 is usually the number because February is the shortest month of the year at 28 days. So that is why it's chosen. But short-term rentals would mean the operation or the use of a main dwelling containing a dwelling unit or any part thereof. So it could just be a room that's operating or offering a place for temporary accommodation, lodging, or occupancy for a period, as I said, of 28 consecutive days or less. And that differentiates, the 28 days differentiates between short-term. And then once you go to 29 days, that is considered a long-term rental. So short-term rentals are only for areas where they're renting out for less than 28 days. This would also not include all established businesses such as motels, hotels, cabin rental establishments, bed and breakfast. That this would not be included under the short-term rental definition. So at this point, we're going to move into the variable options, and we are going to go one by one through this. So we're going to put up a slide for, believe there's 12 of them. We're going to put up a slide, and the question is the next slide, and then we're going to reverse back so that everybody can see what's on the screen. And then as we go through, I don't know if it just needs to be a straw poll vote, but just agree or disagree whether or not you as a counselor would like to see this in the framework going forward.
If I could just stop there, are there any just quick questions on clarifications on those points that I don't want any discussion, just a question for clarification. Mayor Kelly.
It's a question, I promise. You had proof of insurance on the renter package. Does that include noting the township as a lost payee by any chance, or could it?
Yeah, that if it's a proof of insurance, we would ensure that the township would be included in that.
Councillor Roberts, quick question. Councillor Roberts, you have your hand up.
Yes, I really do want to ask questions, but I'm fear that my questions will just be not understood if I don't give context. Specifically in the area of what an application should include. I don't think and the question is, and I guess it's not a question. My concern is, I don't think everything on that list should be on that list. So when do we get an opportunity to talk about that? Next?
We will have some discussion as we go through it, and maybe you want to bring that one right up at the end, because I'm not sure that the options are going to be, that question will get covered. So keep that till the end.
Okay, okay. At the end, I'll bring my stuff.
Yeah,
up.
now if you got
Thank
any questions, like just a quick question that that asks for either clarification or a yes or no answer. CAO Hammond?
Mr. Chair, I have to say this, but I mean, we're talking about concepts here to formulate a program, and questions related to an application form is really more of an administrative matter. Perhaps that's if the counselor has comments in that regard, should we get to that point where we've got a licensing system and we're formulating applications and there wants, you know, the counselor wants to provide input, then perhaps that's the point in time. But at this point, I think we're talking about more general concepts and trying to seek agreement there. So that might be in a more appropriate approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. I have one quick question. When we go to the public, will the offer of the 4 options be part of the discussion? In other words, one option was business as usual, registry, zoning, et cetera.
Yeah, that will be one of the questions that we would include on the survey for engagement scope related.
Thank you very much. Please proceed.
All right, so the first one is the renter information package, and it's really just as it sounds. It would be a requirement that would be built into a licensing bylaw that would have the operator include documents within their short-term rental. Usually you would see it in a binder on pretty much a kitchen counter, and it would include all the information relevant for, you know, the necessary bylaws. You would have information on amenities that are around the township, almost more or less just a free advertisement. And this would really be an easy, proactive way to educate people on the bylaws that they need to follow while they're staying in the township of Muskoka Lakes. But simply put, is this something that council would be interested in including into the framework, or would we rather leave this out?
Mayor Kelly? Okay. All right, general sense, could we get the photos back rather than the presentation so we can see people's hands? Councillor Mazin, quick comments, please.
Yeah, I do like.
I do like this, but my question or comment was, could you take the screen down when we're asking so that we can have our hands up? Thank you.
All right, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. A question here. We have a code of conduct that is a nice little thing that people ignore. We'll have an information package that people will ignore. Will the part of this framework, I don't want to get too far down the road, but will it include that the renters have to sign agreement with the property owner that they have read and agree to these terms and conditions?
Councillor Roberts, I think that is getting a little too far down the road. We're just
All right.
dealing with concepts
Okay.
here. We are a long way from those kinds of details in my opinion. Councillor Edwards.
Okay, can I have a rebuttal there or something?
You may.
Yes, yeah, I could. Having the term licensing in a policy is a way down the road too. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards.
Yes, I was just going to ask the bylaw officer, as our code of conduct, is it working? Because I don't think it is. Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy.
Well, the code of conduct isn't necessarily a regulatory document. It's more of a guide. So it's not something that we can go out and actually enforce. We can certainly encourage it, and we do disseminate it to people as we deal with those types of issues. But it's not something that we can necessarily enforce. It's just it's an educational piece that we use to attempt for compliance. I don't want to say if it works or not, but it certainly is a tool that we would continue to use if we go down this road. Yeah.
All right, so let me just ask for a straw poll here for Mr. Kennedy. Does community generally think that a renter information package is something that we should be discussing with the public and asking their input on? I think is that the question you're looking for? Everybody agree? Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next one. Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you, through you. Again, straw polls. We're going to be doing a lot of straw polling today on this very prickly topic. And, you know, if I'm not gonna vote in support of it as you go through all the straw polls, I think it's important that the public knows that. For what it's worth. I mean, if the public is watching, great, but if we're gonna do 13 straw polls and some of us are not in, you know, in approval of it, if you will, I'd like that to be somehow acknowledged on the record. I mean, I understand that the straw poll scenario is for our own uses and purpose, but in this case, people are watching and, you know, we are going to be framing the future here, given the tone. Thank you.
Councilor Zavitz, I don't think we are determining the tone necessarily. We have, as a council, decided that this is a process we want to do. And we need to give direction to our staff about how they should prepare for public input. And we are not deciding whether or not we have short-term rental in this meeting. There's no decisions being made, but staff is wanting our input so that at least we are more or less on the same directions on not having one. But here's the questions we want to ask our community. And so, you know, do we want to have a responsible person? You know, if we're absolutely against that, then maybe we're going to have to take a slightly different tangent. But generally speaking, I think these are things that we want to be able to go and ask the public on. Is that a fair summation? All right, and let's move on to the responsible person. Thank you. Councillor Edwards, one comment, please.
Yes. My question is, why aren't we putting this whole document out to the public and picking and choosing? We should just put it out and let them tell us what they want. That's what we're here for, to serve the public. Thank you.
CAO Hammond, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think Director Pink alluded to process a little bit earlier, but just to reiterate, in the past, when staff have come forward with a bylaw, there's been a lot of debate and rancor, and it goes to the public. We get public comments and we come back for changes. The process that we've chosen to take this time with respect to developing a licensing regime, because that was the direction that was given, rather than come back to you with a bylaw, pre-thought, pre-molded, we've come forward with a process to determine consensus on concepts, which will allow us to build that bylaw. My understanding, and I would encourage Mr. Kennedy or Mr. Pink to correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of the process that we've developed is that council will, or committee will, determine consensus on concepts, and then we'll take that to the public prior to building a bylaw. So the public will, and I believe Mr. Kennedy made reference to this earlier today, I would put it in a slightly different way. The public will have ample opportunity almost with each step of building the bylaw to provide input and comment. And that's how we want this to proceed, is full disclosure, open transparency. And at some point, when council crafts a bylaw that, or committee crafts a bylaw that they're comfortable with and it's referred to council, I think at that point, members will have the opportunity to weigh in on whether or not they're in agreement with the matter going forward. And so I think there will be opportunity for public input as to where Councillor Edwards was going. Thank you.
Thank you, CAO Harmon. Mr. Kennedy, if you could continue on the possibility of the discussion on responsible person.
So number 2 is the responsible person, and I will be quite frank. This is pretty much a staple in most bylaws that at least that I've seen and Rachel's seen. So this is a great way, since staff level wise right now, we are not here at midnight. We're not here at 1 a.m. So this would essentially cover that aspect where if there's a problem at that time, this would be the person that's going to be called. And they would be required to attend the property to deal with said issue. And they would have to get there within a certain amount of time. And if they didn't, then there are repercussions, not for the responsible person, but for the rental operator. So realistically, like I said, this is something that's been in almost virtually every single licensing bylaw that I've seen. But the question is whether or not council wishes to do something like this. So do we want to move this forward, or do we want to leave this alone?
Any questions or comments? Does everybody think we should be doing this? Councillor Mazin, yeah.
Just a quick comment, something that was brought forward. I think this is kind of critical, to be honest, but just that somehow the neighbors know who that responsible person is. So that's way down the process, but it was a comment made to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So seeing no objection, I think that's fair to say that the responsible person should be on your item list there with the public. Please go on to the next one.
So number 3, and kind of as I alluded to earlier, primary versus secondary residences. So this is something that we've seen in a couple bylaws where municipalities have restricted it to solely your primary residence. This is an optional thing for us, but like I said, a lot of the rentals in this township are predominantly going to be a secondary residence. So I would caution that if this does get included, this would very well eliminate a majority of short-term rentals. Or if we did put this in, staff would have fears that there would maybe some underground activity happen. But is this something that council wants to move forward with, or do we want to eliminate this and not worry about it?
Questions or comments, please? Does anybody think we should ask the public whether this should be restricted to primary residence only? Councillor Burry?
No, I don't think so, because the whole issue of primary residence is actually a CRA issue, not anything else. And I mean, if the issue is getting around people that have multiple residents available for short term, that's one thing. But if it's a person renting their own place where you know, like, I'm having trouble with this because we're really dealing with two things. The first piece is, how do we have some kind of lever for bad behavior? And then the other piece is the environmental around, is it an acceptable property to have the number of people it has in it for sewage and sewage treatment and water purification and parking and garbage, right? Those are the pieces. And it's like, how do we codify a code of conduct that says you're never going to see the bylaw enforcement people?
Fair enough. Mayor Kelly? Mayor Kelly, sorry.
I think just in response to that, I think that's the beauty of the licensing bylaw and the ability to, in essence, what we're trying to do and why we try to frame the question or the concerns or the problem. You'll see a lot of them are behavioral type issues, and it's impossible or extremely difficult to pass regulatory bylaws to control behavior. But a licensing bylaw, at least you may be able to attempt to do that. And we've already touched on the two. So the license application form, one of the things you notice there is information on the septic capacity and the number of bedrooms. So staff will review that as part of issuing the license to ensure that the septic capacity is not exceeded. The second piece with respect to behavior, we now have a responsible person, and there's, and we'll get into the IT providers that, provide software that have sort of an a la carte system. And one of the options is a 24/7 hotline. So when you do get those complaints at 2 a.m. and staff are at home sleeping, there is actually someone answering the phone and a responsible person that needs to be available within an hour. And as we've heard, if they're not, and a certain number of demerit points are lost, we have an ability to revoke that license, and that bad apple is weeded out. So those are things that you can't do with a blunt tool like zoning. Zoning is just, you can do it or you can't. But with a licensing bylaw, you can put these parameters, and that's what we're sort of working through with these 12 questions. I agree. The primary residence is sort of a In my opinion, an obvious no. I think it's used more in housing issues in larger settings where there's a lack of housing. And municipalities in those places have limited it to primary residences to ensure there's still rental stock. But we wanted to throw it out there. And again, as the CEO touched on, sort of broad concepts. What do we want to gauge on the community? I get the impression it's no with this, but again, we just want to methodically work through. So I hope that helps answer those questions.
Mayor Kelly, would you like to say something?
Real quick, thank you. And yes, I agree with what Director Pink has said. The one balance or delicate issue that we have to recognize with every one of these decisions is the blunter the tool, the more likely we're just going to drive this activity further underground and make it that much more difficult to find it and manage it. So I just think in this environment, nobody comes here. I mean, I say nobody, but generally people are not here to enjoy the benefits of, private residences in town. They're here on the waterfront in a secondary residence. I agree with Councillor Burry. How the thing is structured for tax purposes is really beyond our control. So I say take this out.
I would agree with that. Let me just get an idea. Does everybody think this is something that we should not be bothering the public with? Great. We'll move on then. Thank you. Mr. Kennedy.
So next one is license issuance, and kind of alluding to Councillor Burry. You could even take this a little bit further with the multiple owners. But this year, there's two different options. Either one, you can limit it to just one license for the entire property, because we have seen situations where there are ads for the dwelling, a sleeping cabin, and then the second story of a boathouse, for example. Where there's multiple ads for different properties, and then you have one group here, one group in a sleeping cabin. So we have an option of either just having one license and it's good for the entire area and you only have one person at a time, or it's not specific and we do allow for people to have a license for the dwelling and for the sleeping cabin and be able to rent them out separately. So looking for direction on where we want to go with that. I'll leave it at that.
Questions or comments about whether we want to take this to the public or not? Mayor Kelly? Mayor Kelly?
I just want clarification. Does the license actually belong to the property or does it belong to the owner? And if the owner changes, I think I read this somewhere, I just can't remember the answer. If the ownership changes, does the license die?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. If the ownership changes, we would build it in that it is non-transferable.
Councillor Kent?
I may be confusing what you're asking for here. The example given was one property that had multiple buildings and you rented each individually, building potentially separately, versus one owner who has two locations on the lake, let's say. I would have thought if you have two locations on the lake, you have to have two separate licenses. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to manage it properly and you won't know where the complaint is attributable to. So I just want to differentiate those two situations. The one to me is a little less, it's the same issue, but it's a lot of bureaucracy if it's the same property with two buildings rather than two separate locations.
So let me ask a question. Do we think that this is something that we would like to get public input on, or is this something where we could probably decide that as part of the process of developing the bylaw? Any comments? So may I suggest then that we not ask let me ask it this way. Should we not include this in what we're asking because it's somewhat of a technical nature? And we can decide that based on what we learn. Everybody okay with that outcome? Terrific. Thank you. Mr. Kennedy, next one, license fees. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Oh, he's taking his hand down.
Well, I did because I thought you ignored me. Sorry about that. And that we can decide that after, but it would be nice to get public input because if somebody has three buildings and they're renting out to three different groups, that means that the property, probably the septic is over capacity. And I think we should be asking the public, because they're the ones that probably have the most problems when they're renting 2 and 3 separate buildings. Thank you.
Thank you for that thought, Mr. Edwards. I think we had a majority of the people who thought the councillors committee members should take this out. So I think we will take it out. I am sure that we have other ways to address that issue. And I think I've been told is coming up. So we may have another chance to talk about this.
Okay, the next one is licensing fees, as we've discussed already. There's a couple different options we can pick. One can be just a singular fee, regardless if it's a new application or a renewal. You could also go the route where an initial fee is, for example, $1,000 per year, and every single renewal is $500. You could have a less amount for the renewal. Or there is another option where you could make the fee dependent on the amount of bedrooms on a property. So if you have 8 bedrooms, say we set, for example, $500 per bedroom, that would differentiate the bigger properties versus the smaller properties. But looking for input on which direction council would want us to go for the licensing fee, the licensing fees.
Mayor Kelly. So open where there's some discussion. Are we including this or not?
And just a real quick, I just want to throw one thing out there. I don't know if this is the right spot. We have a base level of constituents who have traditionally rented their place for, 2 weeks a year, 4 weeks a year. They do it to cover their taxes and help defray the cost. I think we need to recognize them and we need to register that activity just so that we can know who to contact if there's a problem. But at some point in time, I think there should be a break point. If you rent your place fewer than, pick a number, 3 weeks a year, you don't have to pay a fee. If it's a traditional, or if you live on site, and we don't, this isn't about stopping the renting or even really curtailing or managing the renting. This is about managing the behavior that sometimes comes with the renting. And I think that there's a baseline level of people here who for 50 years have availed themselves of a small amount of rental income to defray the expense of having a second home. I don't want to put them to hardship because we've got $1,000 licensing fee. I would like to know where they are and who they are so we know how to respond. But if there's a place for graduated fees, I think this may be where I would craft a definition. Go ahead.
Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. I think the fee discussion is premature from my perspective. And the reason why I say this is because, again, everything I read up on and the conferences and different things that we're going to, it stuck in my head that the program should be paying for itself. And so, and in fact, the monitoring of the program may not necessarily, that might be contracted out depending on the software that we get into, because some of the software, there's a component of I don't want to say management, but there is another component to that of managing the program. So there's a lot involved that I don't think we can just say, okay, well, let's just put $1,000 here. Yeah, we can put a number, any number as a placeholder. But at the end of the day, I would be looking to understand how much is this program costing the taxpayers and how much are we recovering? And is there a better way to manage the bad behavior? Because 2 separate issues, in my opinion.
Councillor Nishikawa, do you think we should be asking the public for their thoughts on how we structure the fees, not the amount, but how we structure? So to Mayor Kelly's
I don't
point,
think they would have enough information to I don't even think we're going to get there ourselves at this point. There's a lot of information that has to be, other than just saying, okay, how much do you think you want to be charged? Because you got to have the much bigger picture, in my opinion.
Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you. Through you, speaking to the fee piece, again, I do believe this needs to be self-funding, but it should not be a moneymaker.
If I could interject, we're not discussing about how much the fees are going to be or the philosophy about whether this should be self-funding or not. We are discussing about whether we want to ask the public about some fee structure. And Mr. Kennedy has suggested, one fee or fees depending on the number of bedrooms. Mayor Kelly has suggested that we may want to add in another option there, that there's a fee structure based on number of weeks rented. But we're not discussing the amounts of fees and how much financially we should be able to get out of this.
If I might rebut.
Yes.
We actually are, because at the end of the day, this is just about money. The people that are watching care about how this program is managed. And so if the township of Muskoka Lakes, if we sitting here, the budget's still wet. If we're going to somehow get to a place where this is going to cost the township $200,000 to execute per year, or we're going to make $200,000 per year, I think it's a vital piece of information in terms of one fee, two fees, how much is the fee, et cetera. So for what it's worth.
I hear you. And I think there will be plenty of opportunities for discussion on that. I don't think we can have any budgetary discussion until we have figured out what we're actually doing. And I think having a budgetary discussion is frankly not what we've been asked to do today. Any other question? Councillor Roberts, then Councillor Kent.
Yeah, I don't think we should ask the public for this. I think this is a decision that will be made by, when we have more information. I agree with Councillor Nishikawa. Don't ask the public on this.
Councillor Kent.
I agree that we should not ask the public on this, but I do think at some point when it's appropriate, I've said this about another thing that came forward, I think in January, there is a proper way to do a 3-year financial forecast that allows you to be flexible. It's a simple modeling exercise that puts in all the options related to fees and taxes, and you can turn them off and on and see what financial model presents with goals and objectives for the township to meet, that says, if this number, until I see that and somebody gives me a financial forecast with a plan, and then we can talk about whether, if we don't charge $1,000, then this is going to happen to my financial plan. If we do charge $1,000, we're making too much money. Like, that's the way you approach this. You don't approach this as are we going to charge $1,000 or are we going to not charge $1,000? It's a part of a business plan. It's not one item. And so I would like to see, and I've asked this before, a 3-year financial forecast with upfront costs for time zero. Here's how many people, here's what the assumptions are we're making about how many of the people out there are going to actually sign up, and then what costs are embedded in the multiple plan. I don't think you can make decisions and ask for input from the township until we know what we're talking about. So that's my view. It's very simple. A financial forecast, please.
We do have a slide on the financials, I think, coming up. So perhaps we can hold that question until then.
With all due respect, Rob, I'm not talking about a list of what the expenses are. I'm talking about and we don't have it now, but we need a forecast that has flexible assumptions. Then we can talk about the assumptions, not just here are the things. That doesn't tell me whether this is a good or a bad business, whether it's break even or not break even.
All right, this question on license fees is turning into a question on the financials, and I don't really believe that we are here to do that today. I will ask Councillor Edwards to make a comment or a question. Then I think we should be stopping for 10 minutes and having a break. But we should probably decide on whether we want license fees in here or not. Remember, we want to go forward to the public and ask them their thoughts on, I think it's a license fee structure, not the amounts necessarily. It's a license fee structure. Mayor Kelly has raised a point that maybe we should have one more element in there that says not only is the number of rooms, or one fee, et cetera, but maybe we should have a minimum where there is a different fee because you have less rooms. Councillor Edwards, and then I'm going to try to wrap this up.
Thank you very much. It doesn't matter to me if you leave it in or not, because I think the public and lake associations are all watching this, and they'll be sending us emails left and right after this. So you can do what you like with it. And that I'd leave it in, but if you want to take it out, that's fine too, because we will be getting emails. Thank you.
All right, a little bit of a straw vote. Shall we ask the public about the structure of the license fees? Not the amounts, not the financial viability of the project, but do we want to hear from the public about how we structure the financial fees? And I think I heard Councillor Edwards, I think you don't care, so I think we'll take that as a yes. Sorry, you're right. If you take that, if you don't care, then that's a no. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so can we have it again? Hands up. One more.
So I'm going to be voting no, because mostly we don't ask the public what we should charge for a dog license.
We're not asking that.
No.
We're only asking, should there be, what would they like about the fee structure?
Okay,
All right.
again, it generally would come down to somebody looking at that going, well, what's the amount, right? So I just don't think it's worth the while. I don't think we should.
Councillor Burry?
So I'm going to try and raise the bar up a bit again. We're talking about short-term rentals. There's two kinds. There's the kind where people rent to friends and family for a short period of time, largely to offset the tax burden of having a second, third, or fourth home. Then there's the people that are renting to make money. That's the short-term rental market that this is after. They're making money. Do we put the tax burden from them making money onto those taxpayers that don't rent? So can we start to compartmentalize what we're after so that we get some kind of a plan together that will get to the people that are making money and then get to the root problem, those that are over renting it, too many people, too many cars, too much garbage, whatever that piece is, or too much noise, the bad behavior. Like, I mean, that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to get to grandpa and grandma that rent for 3 weeks a year so that they can pay their quite large tax bill as a lakefront owner. We're after the folks that are renting for money to make a profit.
Thank you. All right, straw poll. Sorry, Mr. Kennedy has one more comment and we're going to do a straw poll.
I just want to clarify a few things. As far as the question goes that we may want to ask the public on the fee structure would be something along the lines of, would you agree that the fee structure be done per bedroom? Would you agree that there would be a fee structure where it's just a blanket fee for every single person? That would be the question that would be included on a survey, or roughly around that point. To the second point of Councillor Burry, that the people that are renting out for a couple of weeks that are renting out to friends and family, typically they are not on the Airbnb websites or VRBO websites. They're renting word of mouth and they're doing it for 2 weeks. Frankly, we probably would never even know about them. The people that are on Airbnb and VRBO that are continually renting out their property, and you see, if you go to a property and look at the calendar of availability, and you know that availability is open year round, those are the people that this is going to be targeting. You know, the people that aren't on these websites, we probably are not going to find, because they're not actually advertising their property for short-term rental. They're just letting their friends stay there for a weekend or a week.
All right. We're going to have a straw poll. And frankly, as I think Councillor Edwards said, it doesn't matter whether we put this in or not, we're going to hear about it. So straw poll, will we ask the public for their input on short-term rentals with respect to license fee structure? Structure? 1, 2. No. All right, we will not be asking the public for the input on the fee structure. And with that, we are going to take a break until 10 to 11. All right, we are back in session here. Do we have? We missing,
Five, six. We do have quorum.
we have
physically
quorum, all
present,
right.
7 people.
Coordinated.
We have. Maybe.
All right, Mr. Kennedy, the next point, I think, which is license validation period.
Next one, license validation period. Similar to kind of the fees, it's really dependent on what committee wishes to do. So most commonly, we see either a 1 or a 2 year license in most licensing bylaws. There are some that have 3, 4, 5 year license periods. But we're just looking for some input on committee on where they prefer how long a license would be. And we can certainly ask the question to the public on what they feel, but just looking for input on the committee side on where they see that going.
Thoughts from committee, starting with Mayor Kelly.
Real quick, I think since we're new at this, maybe starting with a 1 year and assuming that everything goes well, you get an automatic extension for 2 or 3 years. You have a problem, you're back to 1 year until you can prove you can manage it properly.
Any other, so there's a suggestion that we make sure we're going to ask the public about that. Any other additions that we'd want to do that? And then does everybody agree that there should be a discussion or a point that we certainly want to include in our bylaw? Everybody generally agree? Councillor Roberts?
I was up to the point to that when you said something we wanted to put in the bylaw. I thought we were just framing something for the public and then we'll decide what goes in the bylaw.
Potential bylaw.
Potential, okay, thank you.
All right, so I think generally everybody agrees that this should be a point that we go out to the public with. We'll move on to the next one. Mr. Kennedy.
Okay. The next one is a maximum limit on the number of license issued in the township. So this is, we have 801 right now. And if we decide to go down this road and implement a maximum, it can be any number that you guys choose. Or we can simply just leave it alone and not impose a maximum, looking for committee input on whether or not we should do that.
Just clarification, what, generally speaking, when townships implement a maximum, what is the objective that they're trying to achieve by having a maximum?
Well, for example, Tiny Township has a maximum that they will only allow 300 in their township. And I believe that is a way of trying to regain that community character. Because if, say, you have 800 in the township and you only allow 300, then all the other ones that aren't in after the 300 license have been issued would technically be illegal, and enforcement would have to continue on that. But I think the goal in that sense is to hopefully say, okay, if you don't come in for a license, you don't get a license, then, you got to find another way to use your property, whether or not it's renting. But yeah, like I think after the 300th license, just throwing that number out there, those people would have to find alternatives, whether or not they sell the property and it's returned to, a regular single family dwelling where people are staying at it as a primary residence. But that's kind of the goal on a maximum limit.
Thank you. Any comments or question from committee? Thank you, Ruth. Councillor in Chicago.
I actually would not put a maximum or at this point. Bring them all on and let's see what we get, is my opinion.
Generally sense of agreement around that. So we will, so we should ask for input, but we think that generally speaking, we probably would not have. All right, terrific. Thank you. Next one. Councillor Mazan, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted clarification. I think that last one, what we were agreeing on is that we will put this out to the community to hear their feedback. Not that we've made a decision whether or not we do maximum limit or not. And the only, I would like to hear from the community on that particular item.
Thank you very much. I think that's the decision we agreed. Nobody's making any decisions in this
Okay.
meeting.
I just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you.
But you know, the general, it's very clear that we want to hear from the public on this. All right, the next one is number of people per rental.
Sorry. It's all good. So this one is actually, especially in this township, again, Muskoka being unique, we are very predominantly on septics in this township. So this would be related to the septic and to the amount of bedrooms. Typically, we see in a lot of municipalities that they allow for a 2-person per bedroom maximum. So for example, you have 5 bedrooms in your house, you're allowed 10. There are some bylaws out there that do have some caveats in these sections where they do not include any children under the age of 12 years old. And they also have other caveats where they would allow an additional 2 people per the maximum. So if you have a 10-person maximum, you would essentially be allowed to have 12 as, you know, the overall guest count. But the goal here is, again, to eliminate those properties where they continually rent out and they have, you know, 25 plus people at the property, where then you do run into those septic concerns. And I will point out that it is preferable to staff that there would be also a septic capacity clause in here, that building or the building department would be able to cap it. If your septic is only up to snuff for a 3-bedroom house, they will be able to cap it at 6 people. No ifs, ands, or buts. But looking for committee input on this, if you guys wish to regulate this or not, and bring this out to the public.
Mayor Kelly.
Thank you. And through you, I actually really do wish to regulate this. I think we need to tie it at the bare minimum to capacity of the septic system. But I have to tell you, yesterday I raised an issue about enforceability of our bylaws, and I'm going to turn to the 2 experts in the room. If we create this, is it realistic to expect that we can enforce it? To me, this looks like a impossible task.
Mr. Henny.
Admittedly, it would be difficult. We would have to attend the property after said complaint and view the amount of people that are actually there. You know, we can use photos and videos and be able to count people through that if we get a hold of those. But it would be a little bit more difficult. But I think if we have something in the bylaw, we can at least point to it rather than not having anything.
Any other questions or comments? Is this something that we would like to see being addressed? Great. So that one, we definitely want to have a discussion about that. Number of days rented per year is the next topic, Mr. Kennedy.
So similar on the moment of rentals allowed in the township, we're also looking for committee input on the number of days that people can rent per year.
Chair, we can't hear them.
We can't hear.
Sorry, that's my apologies. I'll restart. So this is looking at the number of days rented per year. There's really 2 options. Either we do or we don't put a number on this. We do see that like in the Lake of Bays, how they do their classification system, one of the contingents is how many days each person rents per year is how much they pay for a license. So they have that classification system on there, but looking for committee input on whether or not this should be included into the framework and ask for the public or not.
Committee, any thoughts on this? Councillor Roberts.
Yes, my thoughts are that it should be included for the public, and there should be a lot of discussion post the public input, because I think we have good insight into this. Thank you.
Director Pink.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Just wanted to point out that this is one of the, again, benefits of a licensing bylaw. This in particular, this option can address the concerns we've heard about community character and commercial use in a residential zone. If you cap the number of days that an operator is permitted to operate, it ensures at least some portion of time it's not functioning as a rental. And in the converse, what we should actually ask of the community is not just a maximum limit, but also the minimum limit. So what you could explore further, I think it was Mayor Kelly's comments, if you don't wish to capture or require people who rent for 1 or 2 weeks a year needing a license, you could exempt them from the licensing bylaw by putting a minimum limit in. So you're really then capturing just those commercial operators and putting a cap on the amount to protect the neighborhood character. So this, I think, is a very effective tool. Interested to hear committee's discussion on it and again, gain that hopefully feedback from the community on it as well.
Thank you for that. Councillor Kent.
Through you and to David. David, I think this is really a question for you is, would we have, if we capped an Airbnb's ability, even though they're operating as a residential, they're operating as a commercial property in a residential licensing zone. But if we capped their ability to list their property to 2 months a year or 8 weeks a year or something, wouldn't we be open to legal issues with them? But we're taking away their business.
I think,
Mr. Pink.
through you, there's not an appeal right, so to speak, as a zoning bylaw would be. There is an ability to challenge any bylaw that the municipality passes on a legal basis. I think we certainly will be reviewing this bylaw with legal counsel when we get to a later stage to ensure that it's would defend any challenge. But again, my understanding of the Municipal Act, you're able to license operations and put those proper parameters or limits on those businesses as the municipality feels appropriate. But we can certainly explore that with legal counsel once we get to that stage.
Thank you.
Councillor Mazin.
Thank you, and through you. And I appreciate those comments, Director Pink. It just sparked a thought in my brain. We just went through a really comprehensive understanding of the resorts in our last term of council and put conditions around having things open and available to the traveling public. And I do not want to complicate things, but if we're going to do this, if there's a made a mistake, solution, how do we get that kind of feedback from the public in a way that is easy for us to all digest? Meaning, if there's a short, let me step back to what I think I heard you say is we have flexibility or options here. So if you had a short-term rental running, but you knew out of the summer months, the peak period, that they could only operate X amount of time, but maybe there's a relief for some of the, I don't know, I'm just asking this question. Is that even a viable option? And or if we were to, so maybe that's my first question. Is that even a viable option?
Director Pink.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's an excellent question or idea that you could explore, and again adds to the options of the creativity you can get here, and similar to what we did with our resort and official plan amendment discussions. You could add seasonality to this so that you perhaps don't put a cap or a limit on the number of days in the off season, so to speak, in the winter or spring and fall. But perhaps you put a maximum number of days that you can rent in the summer months to provide relief to those, again, neighboring property owners who feel as if they're adjacent to a commercial use. And then again, have a minimum number that doesn't necessitate obtaining a license, because again, we're not trying to capture the grandma and grandpa who just rent for a week or two to family and friends. So it's again, I think in my opinion, hopefully a lot of discussion and feedback from the community on what those dates are and numbers are, and also obviously amongst committee. But I think this is an elegant tool. And again, one of the benefits of the licensing bylaw where you can get quite creative, and what makes, I guess, planning and working in Township Skunk Lake so challenging and unique. We have such a unique seasonal structure that, we can structure around that to hopefully solve again those problems that we talked about at the onset.
Mr. Kennedy.
Just to back on to Mr. Pig's point, I believe Tiny Township actually does do that seasonality thing. They regulate, I don't recall the number. I want to say it's 92 days in the summer months. I believe it's like April 1st to October 31st is what they deem the summer. And then they don't limit anything in the winter time. So that is a viable option. And it is currently being used in Tiny. Whether or not it's working, I am unsure.
Councillor Mazin, I think you had your hand up to.
Yes, thank you. It's a bit of a supplemental then on this. However, this ends up going out to the public, I think there's going to be an art to trying to get the appropriate feedback on this particular item. And, I'll leave it in your very capable hands, but I do think there's an importance in asking questions that separate, those folks that there's a deep history of renting a property here in Muskoka. So separating that from what the other problem we're trying to solve. And then further to that, creating questions that people are understanding the different options here, right? And I know this is going to be a process, but I think the questions we ask up front to elicit the feedback will be pretty important. So that's more just a comment than anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments related to whether we should be having number of rented days per year as a discussion for the public? And does generally everybody agree that we should be asking that? I think is a key lever. And I think Mr. Kennedy, you've probably got some directions about how you could expand the input, the options on the input from the public. Fair enough? Right. Mr. Kennedy, next one, minimum days, nights per year per rental.
Roughly along the same lines as the last one. This is just for the number of days per rental. So this is a situation where we can not regulate this, or you could add in something that a minimum stay has to be 3, 5, 7 days, whatever number is chosen. There are many different numbers. In our research, most municipalities do not regulate this. There are certain municipalities that do, where they have that you can only rent 3 days. It has to be a minimum 3 days. There's others that have a minimum you have to rent for 7 days. But again, looking for committee input on where we want to go with this.
Councillor Burry.
I think this is one of those that you have absolutely zero ability to enforce the bylaw, so don't have it. You can't. How would you ever figure out whether you're going to review every contract? Like this is. I mean, the whole idea is to give the tools to get the bad behavior, and I don't see how this does it. Sorry.
No. Councillor Kent. And then Director Pig.
I actually agree with Guy or Councillor Burry that this is very difficult to regulate, but I believe it's the essence of the problem. I think that rentals below 10 days, let's say a week, are where the issue is. So perhaps we need to spend some time figuring out how we can manage that. But I do think that should be if we put a minimum rental period in, no smaller than X, I think we would eliminate a lot of our problems. And in my conversations with Jane from Jane's Cottages, their minimum rental period is a week. They'd like it to be 10 days, but they felt that captured 2 weekends and made it too expensive for the average renter. And they say that just eliminates all the issues related with short-term problem renters. So I don't know how we process it, Councillor Burry, but I do think that we have to go after this minimum period. And I think it's the solution to the whole problem.
Mr. Kennedy, can you comment?
Yeah, I just want to elaborate. We're going to get into this in a little bit, but this section, if this is put in, this is where the monitoring software would come into play. This monitoring software, if we go with that, they would be able to track something like this. They would be able to track how many nights or days each renter is staying. That's the beauty of that software. So that would be how we would attempt to regulate something like this. Again, I will admit it would be on the more difficult side to do it, but there would be that monitoring software if council chooses to go forward with that, where we would be able to monitor it through there.
Councillor Edwards?
Yes, I agree that we should put this out to the public and see what they say. But there should be a minimum, because if it's 7 days, you're not going to get the weekend partiers going up and really letting loose. But anyway, we'll leave it to the public. Thank you.
Mayor Kelly?
Thank you, through you. And I was simply going to confirm what we just heard about the monitoring software. I've actually spoken to some jurisdiction in the States that has this problem. And they said a lot of the ability to manage numbers of nights came down to scraping the web with the monitoring system, and it was able to tell them a lot. I think minimum 3, because the problem is, I understand it from a lot of complaints that I'm hearing. Everybody arrives and throws a big Yahoo party. And if you're doing that every night, because you're only doing one night stays, it's a lot different than if you're doing it twice a week or once a week. It's that disruptive behavior that comes with the arrival or the last night. And you space those apart as much as you can.
Fair enough. More questions or comments? Got a general direction here with some disagreement. So Councillor Mazan?
Thank you. And I think this might just be a bit more of a comment too. I do think we should send this out to the public. And I just think that the voice that we may hear, or I'm hoping we may also hear from, are some of the smaller resort operators. They might have a perspective on how people travel today, and they might have some interesting ideas as to an approach, because this is a direct competition really to our established businesses, right? So I'm hoping, if anybody is watching this audience, that we will hear from that group too. They may have some interesting thoughts. Thank you.
Excellent point. I get a sense that we should be including this and getting feedback from the public. And once again, Mr. Kennedy, you've got some guidelines about some of the areas that we want to include. Mr. Kennedy, next topic, safety inspections.
Okay, this one I think is going to be the decision that's made here will determine a lot of different factors, because if we don't do safety inspections, then that takes down considerable staff time in enforcing this bylaw. If we do safety inspections and say we do have all 801 properties come to us for an application, I don't believe that's going to happen, but take the extreme where we have everybody comply right off the get-go. That is going to be a lot of inspections. We would suggest as staff, if we're going to do this, that fire does an inspection, the building department does an inspection to ensure safety under the fire code and safety under the building code. And then bylaw would also do an inspection on say zoning compliance. If there was a very severe zoning issue, we could deal with it at that time. Dark sky, realistically, all of our other regulatory bylaws we could take a look at. I wouldn't suggest, like, if they have a dark sky issue that we don't give them a license, but it would certainly, realistically, in a way, if we did something like this, again, it's more of a proactive way for us to be going to properties and taking a look at those more, things that we don't necessarily have to look at unless we get a complaint. But I'm looking for committee's input on whether or not we should include something like this into the bylaw. But again, I will stress that if we do include it, it does include a lot of significant staff time, and very well will most likely include that we need more staff to do this. If we don't go down this road, you may save some money that way and save some staff time that way. But I believe, in my personal opinion, I believe that safety inspections are a good thing, because if we're licensing something, we should ensure that what we're licensing is going to be safe for the renters.
Mayor Kelly, you had your hand up first. Was he? All right, we'll go with Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. No, I'm not in support of the township getting involved in anything to do with rental properties from a safety point of view. First of all, just keep it to that. Because the minute we do an inspection, we then give it the stamp of approval. And if we miss something and something happens, then we are liable. So, or could be liable. So that's my position on that. Let's just focus on the things we're trying to achieve. Behave, curtail bad behavior and the environment. Thank you.
Mayor Kelly.
Thank you. And through you, I'm just going to quickly respond to that last one. I think we probably need to get some advice about the liability or risk of doing an inspection as opposed to the liability of risk of recognizing there might be a problem and not doing the inspection. I'm not sure the liability is any different one way or the other. Now that we've spoken about it, especially. I have a couple of quick questions. I mean, you sort of listed the people. We have building, we have fire. Is there any guess as to and I realize travel time and I realize the size and the scope of the property is going to make a difference, but are we talking about the ability for a small team of people from this office to go and do 2 a day or 3 a day, or are we literally, and we got paperwork, you got to document it when you get back. I mean, there's a big chunk. And the reason I'm asking, I'll get to part 2 in 1 second if you will let me. Go ahead.
Just sorry to answer. So to answer that first question, I think we're going to talk about it in a couple slides from now. But we do have a financial implication slide that does include a licensing officer. So on the bylaw side, if we went down this road with safety inspections, that's what the licensing officer, that would essentially be the main duty for them, is to be going out to these properties and doing the bylaw side of the safety inspection. There is an option if necessary for an additional fire prevention officer. And building, I've spoken to our chief building official. We do still have one opening for a building inspector that could be filled, and you know, they could concentrate on something like that. So there is an ability, but I do believe that there is a very real possibility that we would need added staff if we're going to be going down the safety inspection road.
Thank you. Through you, another quick follow-up. I don't like the idea of contracting stuff out, but presumably is it possible to contract this inspection work? Are there agencies that are sort of licensed and that could stand up and speak for our fire department, for instance, or speak for our building official? Or do we have to all do the work ourselves? And the last one, and then I won't have any more. You may have just populated our list of 800, the first 800 people to go through our septic inspection program.
To answer the first one, yes, we could, instead of the township actually doing inspections, we could build into the bylaw that they have to provide some sort of a documentation that an inspection has been done. I don't know what profession it would be through building, if it has to be like a professional engineer. I think that would be a little bit over the top, in my opinion, because the cost of a professional engineer is quite high. But there are third-party inspection companies for fire, for sure, that we could build into the bylaw. So rather than us actually going to do the inspections on an application, the operators would have to provide us with that documentation to say that they have passed and attest to that.
Councillor Kent, then Councillor Mazin, then Councillor Edwards.
Just going back to the format, I'm just wondering what kind of concern we're addressing by putting in place safety screens. I would suggest that that's Airbnb's responsibility and the owner, and we're not in the rental business. Like we're not the people making these rentals. Why would we want to do this, and how is this going to fix the problems that we had on that list of concerns? I don't know who can answer that.
I think the short answer for this is that if we're going to go down licensing something, I think there's an error that the township now has a responsibility to ensure that when we're giving a license, that the property that we're giving a license to is safe. As Mr. Pink has already said, the refreshment vehicles, when we license them, we ensure that all setbacks are completed. They have a fire inspection done. The health unit has to inspect them, and we need all that information before we issue a license for a refreshment vehicle. So in a sense, this is the exact same thing we would be doing. Obviously, it's a little bit more comprehensive because it's not a small little vehicle. It's a full house that we're going to be looking at, but that's the goal here.
Just one follow-up.
Yes, Councillor Kent. Oh, you're on mute. You went on mute.
Sorry, it would mean we'd have to do follow-ups. So it's not an ongoing, it's not a one-time expense. This is an ongoing certification program that we're going to put in place. That you're going to have to embed into your financial model. That you're going to do it once, and every year you're going to have to recertify them, or every year and a half, or whatever whatever the right time period is. And I'm not an expert.
Mr. Kennedy?
Again, we can build certain things into this bylaw for safety inspections that they're valid for a certain period of time so that we don't have to go every single renewal to the same property. We can, if we say, for example, we have a 2-year license and on the absolute new application, we go and do our first inspection, but that inspection is valid for 4 years. So then that way, when they come and do the renewal after 2 years, they don't have to do any inspections. They would simply just sign say like a declaration to say that nothing has changed at the property, and you go forward with those. But then once the 4-year, every other renewal, we would say that, okay, we need to do a new inspection. It's been 4 years. We just want to ensure that everything is the same and nothing has changed, and go that route.
Thank you. Councillor Mazin.
Thank you, and through you. And it is interesting that the heading here is safety inspections, but I did want to pick up on a comment. I think it was Mayor Kelly brought up about the septics, because as I was thinking about it too, if I'm just interested in exploring this as an option, I'm not sure quite yet how I land. And so hearing from the public will be interesting. But given the nature of some of these businesses, and I'll call it, they're more transactional in nature, maybe a little less attached to what's happening on the land. The ability for us maybe to be on site to ensure that they are following things. I guess we have site plan control again, I don't know, but following the best practices that we have here from an environmental standpoint, ensuring the septic, as I think it was Mayor Kelly brought up, things, is there appropriate parking? Like a lot of the issues that people have been bringing to our attention, having somebody on site, actually having a look and making sure that they are following our best practices that way might be interesting. So I almost see this as not just safety. It's also making sure the property is being managed. So it's just an interesting idea. I don't know how yet I feel about it. And I just also wanted to ask, if you're a resort or a motel, another commercial entity, what are the standards what do we have to do for them? Like, what is the process they have to go through today?
Director Payne.
Thank you. Through you, I just wanted to point out it's along the lines of safety inspections. And I know one of the main things we've talked about is the septic capacity, and along those same lines, a properly functioning septic system. Committee members will recall that we recently updated the sewage reinspection program. When we did that last year, there were no short-term rental definitions or any legislation in the township. So there was no ability to tie that reinspection program to short-term rentals because we didn't have a definition. We didn't have a bylaw. We're not licensing them. One of the other benefits of going down a regulatory route, we can update the sewage reinspection program to refer to short-term rentals and add them to the high risk level so that they're at least inspected every, I forget the frequency off the top of my head, but I think it's every 3 to 5 years to ensure that they are functioning properly. So another, again, along the lines of safety inspections, and I think Councillor Mazan's question with respect to inspections, it's separate, but we could update the sewage reinspection program and they would dovetail nicely. With respect to the questions on resorts, typically most resorts or hotels will be over 10,000 liters a day. So they're not, the sewage disposal is not under the authority of the municipality. It's the Ministry of the Environment. And they would be the approval authority to ensure that those systems are functioning as intended.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, it could be handled by second party inspections, just to have a home inspector, same as what they do with real estate. That's one thing. Secondly, show that the septic tank has been pumped and inspected every so often, whether it's because it's rental maybe every 2 years rather than 3 to 5 years and that. But the tools are all there, and that it's just a case of not only that, maybe you could put it on Airbnb and verbal that they have to have it inspected before they get a license. Simple as that. Thank you.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. One final point. I don't think we should go out to the public. I think I'm repeating myself on safety. That's something that we're going to have to wrestle with ourselves. But I think we need a legal opinion on this whole area. Whether we are liable or not liable. There's been some comment the same. If we know, if we do it, then we've got to do it fully. So I'd like a legal opinion or a professional opinion on this. I don't know how I asked for that during this forum, but I guess I just suggest it and
That's a very interesting point. Any comments on that particular point about maybe this is something we don't want to go out to the public on? Mayor Kelly?
Thank you, and through you, and I actually agree completely with Councillor Roberts on this one, because when it comes to matters of the safety and liability, first of all, we do want to know what footing we're on, and I think some legal opinion would be very helpful. But also, there are certain issues that public opinion shouldn't sway, and I think this is probably one of them.
I see at least 3 thumbs up. Any more thumbs up on that? Very well. Great. We're moving on to the next one. Thank you very much, everybody. Wholesome discussion. Penalty system.
We're on the last one. So with this one, the last one here is the penalty system. It's a little bit long on the slide there. I'm not going to read everything, but simply put, there's a demerit point system that we've seen in bylaws where a certain number is given to a severity of the contravention. And then once you hit a certain number, which is usually 15, that's when a license would be suspended. The second one is a 3-strike rule. Simply as it sounds, on the 3rd strike, you lose your license. Or we just don't do a system. And once someone has contravened anything on any bylaw, they are now liable to have their license suspended. So it could be something very minor, it could be something very serious. It doesn't matter. Once you start, now you're pushing your luck on having a license. So looking for committee input on that.
Committee, thoughts on the penalty system, and what are the implications of not complying with the bylaw?
I'd ask the public.
Mayor Kelly?
To me, simpler is better. Demerit strike, those points, 3 strikes, to me, it's just, to me, unnecessarily complicated. This should be go, no go. There's a light switch. You mess up, there has to be, you mess up, you get caught off base with the licensing conditions. And it seems to me, I was actually surprised, but it worked for me that they had an administrative official, I think it was a CAO, that was responsible for basically adjudicating these issues and making decisions. And I think there should be a first offense, you're pull the license for 3 months, second offense, 6 months, something that meaningfully impacts your ability to carry on after you display that you can't carry on the terms and conditions of the license.
Mayor Kelly, is this something you think we should be asking of the public, though? Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but that is the question.
Of course, it's a democratic process. We should be asking the public everything. But in this particular case, I pretty much guarantee who's going to show up and comment. I mean, yeah, let's get it out there. I mean, we need to take a position where we were elected here to lead on this issue. And this issue was, for I think most of us, if not all of us, a big issue in the last election.
Certainly was.
We have a point of view. We have lots of input from very qualified and capable staff. And at this point in time, not at this point in time, but essentially we're going to come up with a draft agreement shortly. that will contain our best effort to describe the way we're going to approach this matter, and we're going to seek opinion, not necessarily react to all of it, but we are going to take it and weigh it, and maybe we'll find something better in their input.
Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you. I could go with either the demerit or the 3 strikes. I don't like taking it off for 3 months or 6 months, because a lot of people have booked their vacations in advance, and all of a sudden they find out that they can't go to where they've rented because it's penalizing them. So I would go with either demerits or with the 3 strikes. Thank you.
I'm sensing some ambivalence about whether we need public input on this, or am I incorrect on that? Should we get public input?
Sure. Sometimes just to put a question out there, it's not always clear. Sorry, I'm just trying to understand what this whole survey would look like, or whatever the questions we're asking. Because sometimes when you ask a question, it can lead you down different ways of getting answers back. So that's why I'm not sure that it necessarily needs to be asked, or I don't know how it's properly going to be received.
Councillor Roberts, I see you shaking your head. Do you have a comment there?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I don't know whether we get any value out of putting this on a public survey.
Director Pink? Put you on the spot for some comments here.
I think, as Councillor Nishikawa noted, I think how we ask the community is going to be very important. I think in my experience, we need to be very clear that council is contemplating the regulation of short-term rentals and a licensing bylaw, and we're looking for their feedback. I think we need to frame the problem that we're trying to solve. We've heard that a number of times so that the community is aware of why we're going down this path. And then I hope and really hope to lean on our new communications position to frame the questions so that they're not leading questions and you're not getting the answers that you're hoping to get, but that you get valuable, meaningful input so that when we come back to committee, we can essentially repeat the discussion we're having today, but have the input from the community and hopefully reach consensus on the options you choose. And again, not have a swayed response to the survey. As a result, I'm not a particularly expert on I'm not a surveyor, but I hope our communication specialist can assist us in framing the right questions. I think with a penalty system, I think generally I get the sense we all agree there needs to be one in place. I think that's the feedback I'm getting. Whether it's demerit or 3 strikes, I don't really see a harm or asking or not asking. I think in my mind, it would sort of defeat the purpose of having a licensing bylaw if you didn't have a penalty system. The whole point would be to weed out the bad apples by revoking the license. I think Councillor Edwards had an excellent point about people potentially ruining their holidays, but I think you could say that about any penalty system. Unfortunately, that's something I never thought of, and an interesting point. But again, that's why we ask the community. There's always going to be, on top of yes or no or multiple choice questions, there's always going to be an opportunity for just general input, and I'm sure we're going to receive a lot of it, as will you, and then hopefully it'll inform the next time we meet and discuss these topics. So again, I'm not, I guess, probably too fussed whether the question's included or not, because I think there needs to be a penalty system. How we frame it, I think, is largely a administrative internal matter that we can debate around this table, but I don't think there's any harm in asking either. My 2 cents, sorry.
Good input. So I think, given the general ambivalence and the recommendation of Director Pink, I think we should probably include this in our public debate. Everybody all right with that? You don't need to say, because ambivalence seems to be the key on this one, but we will take Director Pink's recommendation on that. Councillor Kent, sorry, did I miss? You're muted still?
I was just going to say the Airbnb system is pretty efficient. So if somebody loses their right to operate for 3 months and has to cancel a bunch of reservations, that guy's going to get a black star very quickly. And I think that the actual penalty system, however severe it is, whichever one we choose to go with, will accomplish the objective very quickly through the Airbnb system. Because tenants and renters, and I've done a lot of Airbnb renting, meaning not as an owner, but as a user. And you look to see what the reviews are, and you look to see how many stars the person has and who the owner is, and you pick the good ones. And the reviews are very clear. So it'll work.
Thank you very much. The next topic, so I think we can wrap this up on saying that Mr. Kennedy has lots of input from us on how we do that, what we include, what we don't include, and some of the nuances in the kind of information we'd like to get from the public. Councillor Burry, a comment?
Comment. All of our bylaws are currently complaints driven. I'd like us to consider this one, we change it around so that as soon as any part of the corporation, senior management, become aware of a problem, we don't have to wait for a complaint, we can act on it. So turning this into a more proactive kind of implementation if we're gonna head that way. And I see a lot of heads nodding. I mean, I want to take the whole bylaw piece, and we'll get to that at another meeting, clearly. I think, well, no, I would like to see our when the corporation becomes aware of a problem, we begin to act on it. We don't wait for
Director Ping?
neighbor on neighbor.
I think just very quickly, you might be stealing a bit of the thunder of the next few slides, but it really, the key is the monitoring software. Without it, I don't think any municipality or we wouldn't be able to enforce a number of the things that we just talked about, all those options. But I think it does put the onus on us to be a little more proactive. Again, we can certainly still receive complaints that there's an operating short-term rental and they don't appear to have a license. But we will be advised by the monitoring software how many licenses we have, how many operations we have, and we can fill those blanks and pursue. And I think that speaks a bit to the financial slide. And again, the potential need for additional bylaw enforcement officers, depending on how proactive we want to be as well. So I'll let Rob go into the monitoring software.
Mr. Kennedy, on your way, monitoring software.
Okay, so under the financial implications, first, we're gonna, as we've just gone through, gonna go through the monitoring software. Not everybody uses them, but I would say that a lot of municipalities are turning towards the monitoring software just because of the ease of the software. Next slide. If this is from Granicus. So I've had some discussions with Granicus and their representatives. There is a new company called Hamari that's out there that I've just found, and a couple of municipalities in Ontario have turned to them. But I haven't been able to have any discussions with them in regards to, what their platform offers. But simply put, the biggest one here is going to be that address identification. Without that, it would be near impossible for us to be doing scavenger hunts across the township to try and find which properties are renting and which properties aren't. So that would be a huge one. In looking at this, you don't have to go with every single piece of software, every single piece here. You can pick and choose. There would be 4 that I would recommend. One being the address identification. We've already spoken about the 24/7 hotline, permitting and registration. So that would allow for applications to be done straight online. They don't have to come in and fill out all the paperwork. And the compliance monitoring would be the main 4 that I would look for. Going to the next slide. This slide shows financial implications of, as we've kind of alluded to throughout this presentation. We would most likely need an additional licensing officer that would be specific for this duty, and possibly broaden it to all licenses that are applied for in the township. We've already talked about refreshment vehicles and taxi licenses. We don't have a high number of those, but this person could take on that job too. Number 2, obviously monitoring software ranges from anywhere between $50,000 to $75,000, depending on how many modules you take. That is only coming from Granicus, I believe. The 4 modules that I spoke of, rough cost off the top of my head was, I believe, $58,000, somewhere in that range per year. So they do it by rental. So depending on how many rental units you have in the township, that's how they deem their price. So obviously with 801 in this township, it's going to get, it will get a little bit more expensive than normally seen. Some if necessary is a fire prevention officer, obviously seasonal bylaw officers, if we wish to have more. Seasonal bylaw officers are, relatively minimal in cost and would be able to, cover maybe some of those additional areas that we don't have service levels on now. If we do get more staff, I would assume that we're going to need more vehicles. So that would be a cost that we have to incur. As far as revenue goes, this is very, very dependent on how we go with this. Licensing fees, I've just given example numbers. So if you do $1,000 license per year and say we get 50% compliance of what we have now, you would essentially make $400,000 per year on licensing fees at 50% compliance. Okay. Second, I'm not going to touch on it because this is a very different process. Aside from short-term rentals, is the municipal accommodation tax. That tax, there are slides on a different presentation that is included in Appendix 2. I'm not going to go through them, but MAT tax is a dependent on this. If we choose to go down that road, short-term rentals would be included in that tax, and usually you see a maximum of 4% added on to the rental fees that would come back to the township. But again, there's some parameters around the collection of that money and how it's utilized. And the third is obviously our penalty amounts. Penalty amounts would be dependent on what we choose. We would certainly be using the newly passed administrative monetary penalty system that committee decided on yesterday through this bylaw. So that would greatly increase our compliance, or we would hope that would greatly increase our compliance, because amps utilized in short-term rentals would be much more beneficial and much easier to utilize than we would through a POA system. But those numbers are very dependent on, how many issues we have, what we set our MAT tax at, and how many licenses we actually get per year.
I'm going to let Mayor Kelly speak. I believe he has to leave very soon.
I do,
has
and
some comments on this before he has to go.
and thank you for this, for that. I think it's really important when we look on the revenue side, and I think Mr. Kennedy was quite right that it's variable, depends on what we do, how we do it, and how we deploy what we collect. I did not see Appendix 2. I guess it was remiss in not looking at it, so I may be telling you old news that everybody's already read. But I simply took a calculator. I applied 4% to the average room rate of $756 a night Canadian, going from memory, times 800 rooms. And I only assumed 50% occupancy. And I came to $4.3 million. There's $4.3 million. There's so much money here. Now, I'm going to go out there and say we're not in the business of making money from stuff like this, but I want to flip it around a little bit and suggest that if a tax of 4%, which part of it has to, I think, go to promote tourism in the region, which we already have that expense, offsets that expense. But if the net result to the township is even a third of 4 million, and that money comes back, and that's money collected from people who are operating essentially unsupervised commercial hotels in our midst, and that money defrays the tax load on those people who are not operating commercial hotels in our midst, it's a big win. So and it's a big win, quite frankly, from my perspective, that I don't know how to get at if we don't license the process. So, I use that not to justify the license. The licensing is to manage the behaviors. But I think that there's a very happy side effect that comes with licensing, and that's the opportunity to explore the use of a MAT tax and to possibly generate many millions of dollars to offset the load on the tax load of the tax burden on our constituents. I don't think we should pass over that lightly. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy, or do you have anything more you wanted to say on that?
Just to quickly elaborate on the MAT tax. I know it's a different conversation, but the way it's collected and the way it's utilized is very specific. It's like a building reserve almost. If you say put it at 4% MAT, that 2% has to be given back to what they define as an eligible tourism entity, which could be any number of those. It doesn't have to go to a single person. It can be distributed. So, off the top of my head, and I don't even know if I'm right, but the community grant program, I don't know if that money could be utilized for something like that. So that is a benefit. The other 2% that we collect as a township would be utilized for the purposes of tourism. So.
Discussion from committee on this. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. I was actually talking to somebody who has a rental unit in our township. They also have one in Huntsville. And they're not opposed to the 4% tax. I think it's a good thing. And one of the suggestions that they said is 2% goes to the tourism and 2% goes to affordable housing. Because then you could be building houses and not putting people in them, because if they take a house that's off the water, that's a house that somebody could be living in. So if they're renting it that way, then you would be putting money towards low rent, affordable housing. And that was from somebody who runs Airbnb. So just a thought. Thank you.
Director Pink, has a comment.
Just a very quick thank you through you. I know it's a separate project. I just want to make that distinction very clear. We're here to talk about licensing of short-term rentals. One of the outcomes is a potential future project of a MAT tax. But just on that point, I've noticed the two previous comments refer to it, from the short-term operator. It's not a tax on them. They're not paying. It's the tourists themselves who are paying that tax, just so everyone's clear on that.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, and thanks for that clarification. And that my question was going to be, once again, if we're going out to the public, there's this topic called short-term rentals. We've just spent the last few hours trying to understand, and there's going to be a real importance to how that gets communicated. Oftentimes, I'm finding we are linking this with the municipal accommodation tax, and that talks to that whole financial plan that we were talking. Like, all of these pieces are connected, but I just want to make sure that if we, however it is sent out to the public, trying to keep these types of things separate so that we can actually get to the right angle, what would be, I think, helpful. So, because I do find that in the general population, when I'm talking about, sometimes now we're blurring these two things. So just a comment. Thank you.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. I think for this go around, we do not include out to the public anything to do with the accommodation tax. It's a separate project, and we work on that then. Just don't confuse it too much, because we don't know enough about it ourselves.
Councillor Kent.
I actually think that the accommodation tax is part of the business plan. And I would think that we need to do I keep calling this a business. And we've got all the elements of the business here, but a financial plan for the business that shows startup costs, recurring costs, the period, the assumptions we're making, which you can just switch a flip. You just change one number in the assumptions and all the numbers recalculate without having to go back to anybody to do any financial work. Very easy to do. But I think the MAT tax is part of the business plan. And how do we make this a business? If we're going to put all this infrastructure in place, and I would say bureaucracy in place to manage short-term rentals, there's got to be a positive that comes to the township. And whether that's by reinvesting in housing, reinvesting in tourism, reinvesting in our own bylaw department so that they can do our planning bylaw development properly, there's a business, and it's got to be an economic thing. So and I don't think this is the right forum, Councillor Bosomworth, but I would like to make a request that this business plan get financial plan, let's say financial business plan get done. I am happy to do it for you, but it's an easy analysis for our financial department to work with the bylaw department to create the business model that goes with this. Listing the assumptions is very, very easy. So I'd like to find out when we might be doing that and how I get that on the agenda for a future meeting. And all we, as I said in a prior discussion, I don't believe it was this, we don't remember which meeting it was at. I said, the only thing you know about a financial plan is that you're bound to be wrong, but it presents a framework for looking at it that allows us all to think about it with a holistic approach from a financial standpoint. So Rob, Bosomworth Council. I was wondering when that was going to be, where we could put that in terms of process. I'm not the process person.
Director Pink, in terms of process.
Thank you. Through you. I think we can speak with our treasury staff, and I think the information is largely in front of you on the financial implications slide, but we can work with staff to put together a bit of a model and have that when the matter returns.
Mayor Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Through you, I just have an observation. I raised the mat with some concern that we get distracted by it. The point simply was, when we start talking about the cost of this, I never worry too much about cost. I look for value. There's real value in moving forward, but the value isn't financial first. And it's not a business plan. And it's not a profit and loss statement that we generate from this, unless you're willing to count the peace and quiet and tranquility and environmental sanctity of Muskoka as a huge win. And I am prepared to count for that. If that's all we get out of this, it's worth investing in. My point was simply to highlight that once we make that decision to go ahead with this, it opens up the opportunity to look at using this MAT, which has been available to us, but frankly, we have no real way to wrangle it until we know who we're supposed to be charging and set up the system to charge them. Director Pink is quite right. It is the tourists that pay. But we have to get through a group of tourist accommodation providers so that we can manage the process of, manage the risk on the environmental side with septic and health inspections and so forth, and do all of these right things. The money is not the reason we're doing this. The money is a virtual guarantee that this thing should be self-sustaining. But even if it isn't self-sustaining, there's every reason that we have to move forward and protect lifelong permanent or residents of this place who are finding the experience as being destroyed by commercial activity on neighboring properties. That's the other side of the equation. I think we have to keep in mind.
Mr. Kennedy, I had one specific question. If we had a tourist tax, I just want to be clear that we would be allowed to use some of that to cover the cost of operating it.
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know the specific avenues that we can use in order to offset costs. I do believe that under the regulation, there is a very broad section in there that says something along the lines of, using the monies to incorporate a program. So I don't know if that would be covered under a short-term rental program or if it's covered under a tourism program. I'm not too sure. I guess there is an argument to be made that short-term rentals are a form of tourism, which in a sense, the MAT tax money could be used to fund that.
Mayor Kelly?
And real quickly, from my limited exposure to it, if we do nothing other than use the proceeds of MAT to pay for the tourist related activities that we're already funding elsewhere, we've freed up that money to come back and offset the expense.
Fair enough. Councillor Edwards?
Thank you. I was just going to say what the mayor was saying, and that is it just goes to a different pocket, but it still reflects on the taxpayer at the end, which would be a savings. Thank you.
All right. Any more comments, questions, comments about the day where we've concluded? Mr. Kennedy, would you like to wrap up what you've heard a little bit? And
yeah, so to conclude this meeting, next steps. Next steps are obviously the community engagement. So we're going to be creating the survey as we've discussed throughout this meeting, and have a page on the Muskoka Lakes, the Engage Muskoka Lakes webpage. We will schedule a public open house meeting, preferably in the summer months when we can catch the seasonal residents as well. And then from that that open house, and all the comments after today and that, we'll draft the bylaw and then have a public meeting on said draft bylaw, allow for comments to come through that public meeting, and go through the process of approval and implementation after that. And that's
Very
it.
well. Councillor Edwards, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you. When we come back with this, I would like to have the costing that Huntsville have, because they've been running this for a few years, see what it's costing them, see what they're raising in the mat tax and everything else like that, so we can make an informed decision. And there's other municipalities we can get that. We should have all that information for us. I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. It'll be interesting. The mat tax, though, is a different program and isn't directly necessarily related. As we've heard, we're not sure that the funds can actually be used to fund this program. Councillor Roberts. You're mute.
Sorry, thank you. As we did with the tree preservation bylaw and the site control on the survey, I would like to have staff provide, a spreadsheet or a sheet that lists all the comments received, not the names of the people, but all the comments that are received through the survey. We did that. We've done that before.
Thank you for that.
Is that possible?
Is that something we could do? Director Pink?
Certainly, I believe we would, we can make that available, and information available to councillors should they wish to digest.
All right. Any more? Councillor Kent?
Just one small comment on that from Councillor Roberts. We've had, I think, pretty weak responses to our survey. Is there anything we can do to promote the survey with some giveaways or input to get real input? If we want, we've gone to all this time to get input from the survey and from the public. How do we promote them to come to the site and give us their input? I mean, those signs that went up about I'm using this as a funny example, but it's the find all the things on your hiking trails. I've found those are everywhere, and that's been effective communication, but there might be a way to make this survey more productive for all of us and more helpful if we could find a way to market it with a little money. Just an idea.
Kennedy?
To answer that, typically, I think I'm going to make a little bit of a joke, but I think we hold the record for the most survey responses through our fireworks survey a couple of years ago. And I would safely assume we're going to beat that quite a lot with this. Typically, when you look at municipalities, when they've done surveys for short-term rentals specifically, there are a ton of comments that come in. I'm going to, I'll put it out there that we're probably going to get over 1,000 comments, I would think, which is quite a lot. So we can certainly do some promotion on it. I don't know if we want to make signs like that, but we'll certainly be promoting it on our website and through social media and other avenues. So no doubt that I think we're going to get an ample amount of public comment through this.
Director Pink, comments?
Sure. Just to point out, thank you through you. Sometimes the percentage response rate might not look impressive on a pure numbers route, but I think actually the response rate we do get per capita is actually quite impressive for a typical survey. But I think as Officer Kennedy pointed out, I think the significance of this topic, I'm comfortable we're going to receive a healthy response. But if not, we can certainly look with our communication specialists to make sure we get the word out and entice people to engage. But I'm not too concerned. I think not that we may have the opposite problem. I think we will get a lot of response to this topic. It is a significant one.
Councillor Mazan.
Thank you. It's for you. I'm just echoing a comment. I think we talked about earlier on today, just as this does go out to the public. I think if there's a way for us to frame the beginning of the presentation, whether it's at the open house or on the survey, just an acknowledgement and understanding of our community, that there's a history of renting in the township, and the problem that we're trying to solve is X. So trying to separate it. So, because we're very close to it. And even as a group, we've been talking quite a bit about these things. So I just think that opening few pages could help some people who might be feeling a little bit anxious about this evolution and how it might directly impact them. We might just be able to use some language up front. So I leave that to the experts. Thank you.
Councillor Burry.
Yeah, just on that, there are several new survey techniques that use surveys as both an educational tool and a fact gathering or opinion gathering, and they can be done in conjunction at the same time. So you do a couple of pages of this is the problem, this is what we're trying to solve for, and then you ask the questions, and so the survey is really the start of the public education process too. So hopefully the communications folks will understand how to use some of these newer tools.
Any other comments from council? I would ask Mr. Kennedy, Director Pink, and CAO Hammond, if you have any questions or comments as we wrap this up. Are you happy with the input that you've got today in this meeting? Is there anything we're missing and you'd like us to discuss? Let me open it up to Director Pink for starters.
Thank you. No, I think it was a very fruitful discussion. I truly hope that council, the communities watching, found it helpful to at least learn more information about it. I know there's still some questions about financial and necessity for the bylaw, but I hope you found the presentation helpful, at least to understand the issues, the tools available, and the options we could go, and that it helps inform the future discussions. And I would encourage all to consider the questions we've asked, because it might be easy today to just say, yes, let's go to the public and ask. But when we come back, we're hoping for reach consensus and decisions on those actual questions, and they are meaty issues. So again, I just hope this new approach you found helpful and informative, rather than plopping a large technical lengthy document in front of you and soliciting a reaction. We wanted to provide the background and the information on it, and then hopefully again give you ample time to digest after we hear from the community. And when we come back and meet with you, we may need several meetings, but we hope to get actual answers on the decisions we posed today and others as well. So thank you.
Mr. Kennedy, any questions or comments? Chair CAO Hammond.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. Just picking up on where Mr. Pink left off. I appreciate for members of committee that this is we're kind of reverse engineering a process that you're typically used to. So I just again echo Mr. Pink's comments in terms of I hope you found the session useful. I appreciate at times perhaps is a little frustrating, but I would continue to ask for your indulgence as well as your patience. And I think the really at the end of the day, we want to get this right. And I think it's going to take some time to get there. But as they say, sometimes the journey is more important than the destination. Thank you.
Councillor Kent, you have your hand up. Final comment.
Just a very simple one. I asked Director Pink this yesterday, and I think just as an education matter, the way Councillor Burry asked about boathouses one time. Can you just, since I've been asked this by a lot of people, explain for everybody why we don't have an avenue from a zoning by perspective to eliminate or to somehow take away their rights if it's zoned residential and we're using it as a commercial property? What rights do we have to take away people's businesses and or change they're zoned improperly? So I just want to, from that, is there an angle that we've missed or we haven't discussed, or a legal angle that we could have or might be taking it as an alternative or in combination?
You, through the chair, certainly happy to go into more background, but that was actually when we first started receiving delegations and complaints at council from the community on rentals. And staff started studying the issue. That was one of the first questions, was how does this comply with zoning? Is it not out of compliance? And we did receive a legal opinion at the time. And essentially our zoning bylaw in a residential zone allows the use of residential, which is defined as human habitation. And we were advised that the way our zoning bylaw is currently written, it would not prohibit that activity. It's not a commercial use, it's the act of habitation. However, should you wish to try to enforce it or argue that this is a commercial use, because you don't have that specific detail or the definitions in your zoning bylaw, you wouldn't be able to pick and choose and say, you're a bad operator, we've got a lot of complaints about you, or you're on Airbnb or VRBO, or you rent this many days a year, you only rent this many. If the municipality wanted to try to tackle this through zoning, as difficult as it would be, you would have to be consistent and take the position that renting cottages is a commercial use. Not because you're on Airbnb, not because you have complaints, not because you did it 80 days a year or 95, renting is a commercial use. And there was no appetite, I think, to basically try to shut down or prohibit rentals. And I don't think that was the discussion today. And I wanted to make that very clear at the onset. I don't think the licensing bylaw has no intention to prohibit rentals. We're not saying we want to do that. We're just trying to ensure that those who rent are doing it the right way and the proper protections are in place for both the patrons and neighbors and the broader community. So the zoning route, as I said before, is kind of a blunt tool. And a zoning bylaw, you permit or you prohibit, and you have the legal non-conforming challenge, which I think would render it almost impossible to enforce. The onus would fall on bylaw enforcement staff to prove that they did not rent previously. So that's a huge challenge in our township. We would not have that information. Everyone would claim they do. And it would make it extremely difficult. The other really huge challenge with zoning is appeal rights. If the municipality wanted to pursue controlling it through zoning, again, you'll have to make a decision as to where you want to permit it, where you want to prohibit it, and it will be subject to appeal rights. And I can almost guarantee you there will be appeals to the tribunal. And that's, I think, what you hear a lot from the town of Blue Mountains, where they ran into a lot of trouble. They tried to do it through planning first, through official plan policies, through zoning, and they were met with huge resistance and appeals and spent, I heard, upwards of $1 million on legal costs through planning, trying to regulate it that way. The beauty of the licensing bylaw, and why I think the vast majority of municipalities choose that route, and all roads seem to lead there, is you can challenge the legality of it, but we have the authority to do it. So I think that's a difficult hurdle or hill to climb. But again, there's no appeal rights. It's retroactive. So it doesn't matter if you've been operating previously, you have to obtain a license. And hence again, why I think all the roads, when we studied it and had a steering committee many years ago, and why the other municipalities, all of our neighbors, have gone the licensing route for those reasons, as opposed to zoning. So that background is.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everyone. I have the second resolution from this meeting to be read, moved by Councillor Burry and seconded by Councillor Nishikawa. Be it resolved that the special planning committee meeting adjourn at 12:14 p.m. and the next regular planning committee meeting will be held on Thursday, May the 11th, 2023 at 9 a.m. held at as an electronically and in-person hybrid from the council chambers here in Port Carling, Ontario. Any discussion? All those in favor? Anyone opposed? That is carried. Thank you.